How's it going, everyone? Data here, and welcome to the ultimate guide for everything franchise mode on NHL 25. In this video, I will be bringing you through quite literally everything that franchise mode has to offer. From every screen to every possible setting, I'll be guiding you through how to navigate each one, as well as providing my tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way from playing franchise mode, be it GM mode and Dynasty mode in the EA NHL series for what's now been, I believe, 18 years. So if you came to this video with a particular question in mind, or you're just a player who wants to hear more about how the mode works or what my recommendations might be, I welcome you to sit back and relax as I go through every aspect one by one. Or please feel free to use the timestamps below to go straight to the area that you want to learn more about. Now for the franchise mode guide this year, I'm trying a slightly different approach, as like usual, almost everything from last year's guide applies to this year's. In the past, I've had no problem recording similar videos, but seeing as how last year's was over 2 hours in length and extremely comprehensive in detail, I found myself very frustrated trying to recreate and remember every detail that I had said. So after about 6 hours of recording and achieving about 40 minutes of usable footage, I decided that it would make more sense to just reuse parts of last year's video and then record footage of what is new in franchise mode in NHL 25, such as player conversations, goal setting, and contract clauses, among others. I hope that you don't mind me recycling parts of a video in 720p, but with how broken NHL 25 has been, this guide is already coming out a month later than it should be due to patches and patches for the patches, so I really just wanted to get it out for all of you before Christmas. So all of that being said, this is now my 4th annual EA NHL franchise mode guide video, and they always get longer every year as there are so many details to cover. So if you are a first-time viewer who's feeling overwhelmed by the length of this video, I would encourage you to just take it slow, experiment a little bit with the mode yourself, and refer back to this video if and when something comes up. These guide videos are always very popular, which I think goes to show how much people love franchise mode, but it also shows many players just have questions on aspects of the mode that are never really explained. So I do hope that this guide will be helpful for you, but if it so happens that your question was not answered in this video, please leave a comment here on YouTube or over on our Discord server, linked in the description, for myself or someone else to reply to. We have a fantastic community here on the channel of almost 8,500 subscribers, and our Discord server has over 700 members who love franchise mode and would love to offer their help to you. And hey, if you would like to join that community, I'm 100% confident that it'll be that much stronger with you as a part of it. So I encourage you to subscribe so that you never miss out on any uploads here on the channel, as we do viewer-led franchise mode series, player career simulations, and much more. So if that's something that you enjoy, this is the place for you. And if not, that's not a problem either, and a like on the video would be very much appreciated. Now with all that out of the way, let's get started with this guide, and I'll let you know in the bottom left corner whenever footage is coming from NHL 24, but again, still 100% applicable to NHL 25. First things first, we gotta talk about what roster are you using in your franchise mode. And you essentially have 3 choices. So if you scroll over to the More tab, go to Rosters and click on Active Roster, on the left side of your screen, you'll see all of EA's own rosters that they put out every 3 weeks or so, I wanna say. And you can choose any of those rosters that you like, dated to the date that fits best for you. So for me, December 17th is their most recent roster update. I could choose that, and bada bing, bada boom, I'm good to go. That's the roster that I'm using. It has all the updates of the transactions in the league up to that date. But what if there's some sort of transaction that happened after that date? The Capo Caco trade, the Justin Barron, Alex Carrier trade. What if I want to update that? Well, good news. This is where you can create a custom roster. Custom roster doesn't mean you have to be some sort of genius with player creation. Not at all. I'll go over to rosters again and scroll over to player movement this time, and now I'll make the move that I wanted to make. Let's say it was the Barron and Carrier trade. So I go to Les Canadiens de Montréal, I go and click on Justin Barron, press square on PS5, bring him over. Then I go to the Nashville Predators. Monsieur Carrier, il est où? Voila. I make the change, I click X, finish, and now they've been swapped over. By definition, that is now a custom roster. So again, if I go to roster and click on active roster, it will now show that my checked off, my active roster is custom roster 10, let's say, which is dated to the date that I'm doing it. So just keep in mind, because they don't have names unless you share them to the community. So just keep in mind the number that you're at and the date that you did it. So custom roster 10, December 22nd, I would know, okay, that's the one that I just made right now. Now your third option is downloading a community file, and that is console specific. Keep that in mind. So being on PlayStation 5, I can only download other PlayStation 5 rosters. I go to roster roster sharing, click on Go to Hub, click on Download Community Files, and you're presented with a ton of different possibilities. Could be opening night roster, this one is popular, KHL rosters, True Chell, 2025 with draft picks, etc., etc. You can sort by the number of likes, downloads, the date uploaded, or you can even search by pressing square, then typing in what you want to type. For me, I'm typing data right now because I have my own rosters. If you want to find mine, go to data, data franchise V2. I read the description, top prospects, team cap compliant, virus overall, December 20th. Great. I click on that one, I download it, and then the game will ask me, do I want to just have that file downloaded, or do I want to set it as my active roster? If I set it as my active roster, and I back out and go back to roster, click on active roster, there we go, active roster, I will find that that is now that is the one that is being run as active. So if I start a franchise mode with the check mark next to this one, then it will be that roster that the franchise mode is built off of. So just keep in mind that whichever one has the check mark is the one you're using. And if you do want to make changes to a player, I was just talking about changes in player movement and things like that, but you could edit the players themselves. You can't edit everything about a player. Let's say you choose, you can look at all the leagues you can choose from, but if I choose the National Hockey League and then I go to, let's say we're going back to the Canadians, let's say I want to make a change to Mr. Lane Hudson. I'm a huge Canadians fan. I love Lane Hudson. I want to make a change to him. You can click on Lane Hudson, and it will provide you with some things you can and some things you can't change, like his face and hair color and all that I cannot change. However, I could change other things about him, that is like his handedness, left to right. I could change his player type. I could change it from a defenseman to a forward, secondary position, his jersey number, does he like to fight? All that I could change. Not his birthplace, not his birth date. But I don't know what really the line is that could be crossed. I could change his handedness, but I can't change his height. Anyways, that's a conversation for another day. I can't change any of that ever. But for those things like his handedness, his player type, or even his attributes, I want to give him, okay, 99 speed. I love Lane Hudson, 99 speed. All those things that I'm doing right now can only be done before the franchise mode save file begins. Once you start your franchise mode save file, you are not able to change any of these things about a player. In fact, the only thing that you could change about a player within the franchise mode would be their X factors, their superstar abilities and their zone abilities. So I can add them before the franchise mode or during the franchise mode, but that's the only thing that I could do during. Everything else must be done before the franchise mode begins. You make your changes, you make sure that that is the roster that is being used with the check mark next to it, and then you start your save file. And finally, just to quickly tell you, you might be wondering, okay, well, what do all these numbers mean? Overall numbers, potential, what does it all mean? It's a bit subjective. Nothing's really written in stone. In my experience, let's start with the forwards. Your first line forwards are likely 87 overall and up, something in that range or so. Your second line forwards are probably about 84 to 86, 87. Your third line is more like 81 to 83, and your fourth line is probably like about 78 to 80. Any player, in my opinion, who's about 77 overall or less should be in the AHL. Look at that, what a coincidence. They have Heineman and Pizzetta, both 78s in the NHL, but no 77s or lower. That's about my cutoff, 77 or lower for the forwards. For the defense, looking at what their overalls mean, your top pair is probably about an 87 overall and up. Your second pair is about 83 to 86, and I'd say your third pair is about 79 to 82. 78, or even definitely, maybe not 78, but definitely 77 and under. I think that's where you would put them in your farm team, your AHL, your American Hockey League system. Then for the goalies, that's the hardest one, because overalls, if you play franchise mode, you know, overalls can just mean nothing sometimes. You could have an 82 overall who wins the Vezina, and you could have a 94 overall Connor Hellebuck who barely scrapes his way to an 890 save percentage. So in my experience, as long as your goalie is maybe 84 overall or higher, it's more often than not that he'll be okay. But you could have an 80 overall who's fantastic, again, and a 90 overall who's terrible. So all that to say, don't go crazy on getting yourself a super high overall goalie, because it could be all for nothing. And what do these potentials mean? Looking at the forwards. So the potentials mean, for players 26 and younger, they mean what that player could become, their ceiling. The low, medium, and high means the likelihood of them reaching that ceiling, as well as the speed at which they'll reach it. If a player is 27 or older, the potential basically it's the speed of their regression. So for forwards, the spectrum from the very top to the very bottom goes franchise, elite, top 6, top 9, bottom 6, AHL top 6, AHL bottom 6, I believe AHL extra forward. So essentially, anyone with AHL potential is not going to be super interesting to you, but potentials could grow. Top 6 can become elite, elite can become franchise, and vice versa. They could regress. So there is some fluidity. For the defense, the spectrum is similar. It goes from franchise to elite, but then to top 4D, top 6D, 7th D, which means like an extra defenseman, then AHL top 2, AHL top 4, etc. down the list. And for goalies, same thing, franchise, elite, but then down to starter, fringe starter, backup, then AHL starter, AHL backup, all of that. So for the players who are 27 or older, I said that the potential relates to the speed of regression. So for example, Brendan Gallagher, he's 32 years old with top 6 potential at 83 overall. With top 6 potential, will he get to become an 87 overall? Is that what he is? Is that what he'll become? No, not at all. It's just saying that with top 6 potential, he will maintain his 83 overall for longer than if he had bottom 6 potential. If he was an 83 with bottom 6 potential, within a year or two, he'd be a bottom 6 guy, an 80 overall. But because he's an 83 with top 6 potential, he will regress more slowly. So here's a good example of that over in Los Angeles. Drew Doughty, he's 88 overall with franchise potential. It says low, but don't worry about low, medium, or high. If they're 27 or older, it becomes exact. So Drew Doughty has franchise potential. Is this because he is a franchise player? No, not at all. It just means that he'll stay as an 88 overall for a much longer time than if he had top 4D potential. As an 88 with franchise potential at 34, he should still be an 88 once he's 35, 36, maybe once he's 37, 38, it'll drop to elite, it'll drop to top 4. Of course, Father Time is going to get everybody. It will always regress eventually, but the speed at which regression happens has to do with the potential. So don't worry about what the words mean. Franchise could also mean very slow regression. Elite could mean slow regression. Bottom 6 or AHL potential means very fast regression. Think of it like that. Okay, so with all that understood, now let's start the actual franchise mode. So when you start a new franchise mode, you obviously click New, and you'll be presented with 3 different options. I can start an authentic franchise mode, which is taking over one of the 32 NHL teams, a custom league franchise mode, which I'll get into in a moment, or a 33-team expansion draft franchise mode. I'm creating a custom team and joining the league as its 33rd team in Houston, in Quebec, whatever it might be. So you can choose the default rosters, which come with the game on day 1, or custom roster. I just chose one, I downloaded it, I set it as my active roster, or whatever, so I'll choose custom, and then you select the team that you already created in the creation zone, which I'll show you in just a moment, or you create a team right here, right now. If you create a team right here, right now, it will bring you to the team creator that you would have already seen in creation zone. You name a team, you do the helmets, the jerseys, the pads, the colors, the mascot, the details, everything. You even the arena, team identity, team arena, choose the seats, the fans, etc., 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 goal songs, blah, blah, blah. Super fun. You can choose those right there and create the team after you've said, I want to do an expansion draft. Or if you did it already by scrolling over to more in the creation zone and hit create a team, you can choose a team that you've already created. It'll be listed here if you've already created one. So keep that in mind. There's also created players. I didn't touch on that really because that's not really part of franchise mode. But if you do create players as well, keep in mind you can assign them to NHL teams. You can assign them to junior teams. You can put them in the draft into free agency. That's a fun little touch as well. But back to franchise mode now. So if I'm going to choose the 33rd team expansion draft, let's say I love all these details. Burnaby NHL 33. Welcome to the National Hockey League. Wonderful. I'll click save, and now that team will be added into the National Hockey League for me to choose. It could just be that I create that team and allow it to exist. I can still choose the Canadians and have Burnaby be in the mode. Or I can choose to actually be Burnaby NHL 33. So let's say I choose Burnaby. Do I want to customize my AHL team as well? I could do that right now, or I can just click continue, up to you. So you can also customize your farm team. And then you choose, okay, am I going to be in the Pacific Division? Where am I going to be? And there you go. So let's say I want to be in the Atlantic Division. I click continue. I choose all my settings, which I'll show you in a moment later on. I say start my career. And the franchise mode will begin, keep this in mind, before the 2024 NHL draft. It's going to reshuffle the draft lottery, number 1. And number 2, blah, 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 thank you. I do my expansion. Oh, actually, I'll show you this first. We start the expansion draft. You go through each team to see which players have been protected. The little guide here on the screen will walk you through it and tell you what you got to do. Let's say I go to Buffalo. Who's available here in Buffalo? You can choose by overall, by potential, whatever you like. I want Jason Zucker on my team. Great, he's my guy. And at the bottom it'll tell you how many left wings, centers, right wings do you have, your roster space, your cap space, blah, blah, blah. So let's say I just auto-generate the rest of the picks. I'm good to go. The point that I wanted to make here is that if I keep on simming towards the NHL Entry Draft, the prospects available will be different than the actual prospects from the 2024 draft in the real world. So if you look at the draft class, these are all generated players. Now these players are actually real. All these players were just created right now to populate the draft class. But in the real world, let's say Becca Seneca is supposed to go to Anaheim. He's already on Anaheim. Plus, Anaheim just got another guy who's medium elite who doesn't even exist. So it will kind of mess things up to say the bad teams are going to get better a little bit faster because all of them are getting their original prospect plus another one. The Ducks get Seneca plus this guy Kozlov. Utah gets Tijaginla plus this guy Bruin. So just keep that in mind if you're doing an expansion draft. Now, the other option that we spoke about was creating a custom league, and a custom league is very exciting because there's so much control and creativity that can go into it. Just for example, number of teams, you can have between 6 and 48 teams in your league. So you can add custom teams, you can go back to an original 6 type thing. It is up to you. You can control that as you like. The number of conferences, divisions, salary cap inflation on or off, player salary scaling on or off. Additional information always on the right side if you want to read some more on that. Salary cap max, so in year 1 it's 88 million, but in year 25 it's 125 million. So over the 25 years, if salary cap inflation is on, the salary cap will increase by $37 million. If you want that off, turn it off, no problem. Salary cap minimum, player salary max and minimum, rookie salary max, all of that is controllable by you. You know, I'm not usually dabbling in this too much myself, but that's the beauty of franchise mode. That's what we're always advocating for. We want to have more control over this offline mode, and that's what finally Custom League has given us a little bit of control over. We have the league, now the next we want is the players, but one battle at a time. NHL schedule, number of games, division games, conference games, interconference, the standings format, how many points for a win, overtime win, shootout loss, season tiebreak, playoff qualification, wild card on or off, if yes, how many teams make it, standings tiebreaker. For the playoffs, is it going to be home, home, away, away, home, away, home? Is it going to be home, 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 away, 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 home? Is it going to be home, home, away? And as I go on there. AHL League, same thing right there. All the same things for the AHL that we just saw. And there you have it. So you can set up so many different things and just allow your creativity to take over. From there, we can now get into the most common franchise mode, which is an authentic franchise mode. In authentic franchise mode, you choose a name for yourself. Let's call it Guide. And you choose one of the teams in the National Hockey League. Let's randomize it. Usually you choose the Canadians, but let's keep it random this year. I will choose, and I say, my eyes are closed, stop. The LA Kings, great. I can either choose the Kings, or I can even click square and substitute the Kings for another team. This would totally remove the LA Kings and its players from the league. But here's where I could slot in and replace the Kings with an alumni team. So I could choose the LA Kings alumni instead, or even an alumni all-time team, which is going to have all kinds of legends mixed between different teams. Or if I had created one, a custom team. But if I just want to keep the LA Kings and not substitute them with anybody else, I choose LA, beautiful. Tells me all the stuff, the information on the team, salary cap, top players, etc., which I may or may not want to know. It shows me what division they're in, tells me their overall, as well as giving me the option to swap them around with another team in another conference. I could put the Kings in the Eastern Conference or the Central Division, whatever I want to do. And I could even do other teams, even if it's not my own team. I could change Minnesota and Florida. So that is also more control over the mode, which we're always happy to see. So if I like my division, I like what my team is, everything, I press on continue. And now we come to the main settings. Some of these options must be decided upon now and can't be changed once the franchise mode has begun, so be mindful of that. Owner mode must be turned on or off now. Player morale must be turned on or off now. The fantasy draft, of course, must be turned on or off now, because that will define what kind of franchise mode you have. Accept relocation, the owner always authorizing your initial attempt to relocate the franchise. I believe that has to be turned on or off now, and GM firing has to be turned on or off now. Everything else you can do within the mode. Fog of War, head coach edits lines, you can turn those on or off later, but definitely your owner mode and your player morale must be decided upon now. For the sake of this guide, I'm going to keep owner mode turned on, morale turned on, but personally my settings look like this right here. These are the settings for when I play my franchise mode, but you might be wondering, why is that the case? Should you have these on? Is it worth it? Well, for the sake of this guide, I'll have them all turned on, but let me tell you a little bit more about each one. Owner mode, for example, in my mind, is just not worth my time. It doesn't excite me, really. The challenges of it don't pique my interest. Back in the good old days, NHL 7 with the star system, that if you upgraded your PR team or your gym or whatever it might be, it gave things to the players. But nowadays, it's just, hey, can you set when bobblehead night is? What's the budget for this going to be? And can you please upgrade the parking lots and the bathrooms? Which, by the way, costs a ton of money. Win the Stanley Cup, win 20 games in a row, and here's $50,000. But you need to hire your coaches, your staff, and make all these upgrades to this building, which for some reason is my responsibility. on like $2. So my staff suffers and it becomes more difficult to win these Stanley Cups that for some reason ownership doesn't even value because I'm busy upgrading the bathrooms to level 2. That's my problem with owner mode. It could be so good, but in my mind, it just doesn't interest me at all to put in any of my time for it. The next few options are pretty self-explanatory, starting with the fantasy draft. If you turn it on, the entire league gets redrafted as if it's the NHL Entry Draft or the expansion draft. If you're picking at 1, now you get McDavid. If you pick at 2, maybe you get McKinnon, and so on. So if you chose, let's say in this example, the LA Kings, you keep your team, you keep your conference, your division, everything, but the players on your team and on other teams get thrown into the big pool that get redrafted. So it's fun, it gives you a new challenge. You can draft only by potential. You can draft by age, take an old team, give yourself different thematic teams. It's a fun little challenge, keep things fresh, mix it up, and you got to turn it on right here if you're going to do it. Next up, the salary cap, whether you play with on or off. In NHL 25, it's a little bit different because previously with salary cap off, you could just give every free agent that you want to sign a $20 million contract and it didn't matter, they would always sign with you. Now in NHL 25, with the way that negotiations work in free agency, which we'll get to later on, if the player's organizational interest is too low, even if you give them a crazy overpay, they most likely still will not sign with you. So salary cap off is still very helpful if you want to build your super team and you don't have to worry about salary cap constraints at all. Absolutely, go for it. It's your franchise mode, it's an offline mode, you're not hurting anybody, go ahead and have fun with it. So you got to decide that here and right now as well. Salary cap will be on or off. And we'll get a little bit into cap compliance before starting the mode in just a couple minutes as well, because if you're playing with cap on, because LTIR isn't in the game, you have a team like Colorado that's making too much money, I'll get into it in a minute. GM firing, again, self-explanatory. If owner mode is on, you can turn GM firing on as well. If things are not going well, you're not meeting goals and whatnot, you could be fired by the owner, which allows you, yes, to sign with another team, but can also be very frustrating because you could be a super successful team, and then because you didn't upgrade the bathrooms, now the owner is mad at you and saying your job's at risk. So I prefer to put self-imposed firing on my franchise modes. Sure, if I miss the playoffs 10 years in a row, I'm going to fire myself and start a new franchise mode. But I prefer to take that randomness out of the hands of the game. CPU trades, this will have teams trade with one another. Now, it seems as though trades between CPU teams, right, CPU to CPU, only happen at the trade deadline and at the draft sometimes, or really at just the deadline. So already barely any trades happen ever, but turning it off will have no trades happen. So I would say, yeah, turn it on, but keep in mind that trades between CPU teams basically only happen like one day a year. Player morale now. Here is a huge one. Player morale could be another thing that's great in theory, but just doesn't work out for me. In my experience, I've told these stories many times before, player morale becomes so stale so quickly, and in general, it just doesn't make sense because you're dealing with irrational computer beings. For example, a player could get injured and you're keeping them out of the lineup and then they're complaining about their ice time. Not only are they losing morale because they're upset about their lack of ice time, but then their overall is going down, they're demanding for a trade, then in turn their trade value is reduced because their overall is less, and before you know it, you're trading a top 6 forward or a top 4 defenseman for a 7th round pick. All because they got injured and you literally couldn't play them due to their injury. So player morale, on top of that brokenness, just the conversations become stale. Players lose morale and get upset out of nowhere, so it's just more frustrating than anything. I will, of course, cover it, but I turn it off in my franchise modes. Fog of War, again, very interesting. I like it in theory, and over the years it has been fixed. It used to just be Fog of War on or off, and what that meant was you didn't know anything about the player unless you sent a pro scout out to do a report on them. So it doesn't make sense that you don't know anything about Connor McDavid unless you study him for 2 weeks. Like, that's the thing that frustrated me. Now in Fog of War, I'll show you in the settings later, you can change certain things about it where, okay, it will never show me potential, but it will always show me overall. Now that is a system that I like, but the only thing holding me back is that I only have 20 scout spots in my organization. And if I want to fully scout a draft class, I need at least 16 scouts. And that's just for the basics. If I want the entire draft class uncovered, I need all 20 amateur scouts. So if they ever change it in franchise mode that we have 25 or 30 scout spots, and I can keep 20 amateur and 10 pro, I would turn Fog of War on. But because I just don't have enough scouts to actually go and get the information that's required, I turn Fog of War off. Head coach edits lines, that's just basically when players go up or down in overall, or when injuries happen, will the CPU manage the roster for you, or will you have to go in and do the roster changes yourself? I keep that turned off because I like being in control of it, so I'll just go ahead and do that now. Auto owner mode, I don't really get this because if you're turning owner mode on because you want to do the budget and the bobbleheads and all the XYZ, then why would you just turn it on but then auto it. But hey, maybe you just want to keep an eye on it, and that's okay. Just keep in mind, if you turn it on, then you don't need to do finances, budgets, upgrading, maintaining, all the things that kind of turned me off from owner mode in the first place. Except for location, another owner mode thing. With this turned on, the owner will always accept when you ask for your location, no matter what the status of the team is. Auto sign free agents and auto staff management is basically for people who just want to do long-term simulations and not touch anything at all. They just want to just kind of see the sim. So you won't need to do anything in the offseason. The game will re-sign your forwards, will take care of free agents to fill up your roster. Not well, mind you. I'm not saying it does a good job, but they will fill up the roster and get players signed to contracts. Auto staff management, they'll hire and fire coaches and scouts for your team as well. So again, just less for you to do in general. So for this guide, I'll keep owner mode on, morale on, fog of war on, but again, I usually keep those all turned off. All right. Advancing now to the rules and settings. Before we start the career, there's 3 more things we can look at. Quick settings, advanced settings, and gameplay sliders. Now, once you get your franchise mode save file started, these screens look a little bit different, but before you've started the mode, you have these 3 different places to go into. So quick settings first. Here are the places where you can see things like injuries being turned on or off. Fantasy draft, again, we just saw that. Authentic cap penalties. If this setting is on, real-life buyout penalties and traded salaries will be carried into the mode. So think about the Minnesota Wild and how they're paying over $14 million to ghosts. Is that still going to be a penalty that they have to have in this franchise mode? Auto sign free agents, a lot of things that we already saw. What is the length of your franchise mode? Max 25 years. You can choose between 5 and 25 years. CPU trades on. The difficulty of the game, it depends if you're playing any games. Draft pick ownership. So if teams in the real world have traded draft picks, is that authentic, or do you want classic where every team has their round 1 to round 7 draft? You can kind of reset the league in that way if you would like. NHL salary cap on. Trade difficulty, easy, medium, or hard. Hard is what I always do to try and keep things from being cheesed too much, but easy does not mean that everything goes through. A lot of people ask often, is there a way to force trades to go through? Is there a forced trade option? Sadly, there is not. So changing the trade difficulty to easy at any given time is probably the best way to try and make that happen, but in general, I keep it on hard, and sadly there is no forced trade option. Waivers being on or off, relocation, fog of war we just saw, individual attributes. So this is what I'm saying with fog of war being turned on. I can manipulate, okay, is it just the attributes? Is it just the overalls, the roles, the player types, the potential? That's what I would say, definitely. If you have fog of war on and you don't care too much about your amateur scouting, I would recommend definitely playing with it and playing around with which ones do you want to be able to see and which ones do you want to send out your pro scouts to have to uncover for you. For the auto scouting, you have 4 options here, as you can choose for the pro and or amateur scouting to be done automatically by pressing one or the other or both, or none. Personally, I always press none because the auto scouting is just not efficient whatsoever. I'd rather just send out the scouts myself, even though it does take longer. That's my recommendation. And for auto staff management, here's a big one. People often ask in the comments, I don't know where to hire my staff from. I'm going to the hire staff screen and it's not letting me click on anything. Why can't I hire these coaches or scouts? That's because your auto staff management is turned on. If turned on, you can look at everything, but you can't click the hire button. If it's turned off, then yes, now you can hire the staff. So go back to your settings and turn auto staff management off if you want to be able to hire whether it be coaches or scouts. Advanced settings now, head coach edits your lines. I said no to that, but it could be for the NHL or the AHL, minor league head coach as well. For injuries, if you have those turned on, you'll want to know whether you get a notification that the player can come back to your lineup once it is a playable injury or a fully healed injury. Or you could even say both, but if you want to be notified when a player's injury is now playable, for example, he's out for 6 weeks, but after 5 weeks, he can come back to the lineup, but he's going to be a bit reduced in overall for the next week as he finishes up healing from that injury. If you do play that player with a playable injury, you're risking the injury being re-aggravated. So for me in my franchise mode, unless it's really like an elimination game in the playoffs, I always say fully healed. I only want to know when he's back when he's fully healed. Don't even tell me when he's playable. So I set that for both the NHL and the AHL. Only tell me when they're fully healed. This next one's self-explanatory for auto-rotate goalies. If it's turned on, your goalie with the higher overall will play more often. Let's say I have an 88 and an 82. The 88 will start, 60 games, and your 82 will play one of the games of a back-to-back or whenever else the game thinks that the goalie should play, but it won't be a 40-40 split if the overalls are drastically different. However, if you have 2 goalies that are the same overall, they're both 83s, then the game has trouble with that. It doesn't really care who's performing better, it just rotates by itself. So if you really have one of those cases where I'm not sure who I want to be my starter, it could be that one is performing better, I want to make him the starter, but the game's not understanding understanding that maybe even my 83 is playing better than my 85 and I want him to be the starter without my 85 getting more starts, turn it off and do it manually. You can stop the simulation whenever you get to a back-to-back, or you could just do it game by game, whatever it might be. It's a bit more annoying, I will admit. I wish you could just set that this guy is my starter. I could definitely see that being a setting in the future, because as I was saying earlier, it's not uncommon to see your 78 overall outperforming your 94 overall, and if I want him to be my starter, I have to go and change it every game, and it's very annoying. So just be mindful. Are you playing every game? Are you simming multiple months at a time? Do you have a lot of back-to-backs? Just whether it be on or off, and the performances of your goalie, just keep that in mind. Now, Sim Engine scoring could be low, medium, or high. Basically, this is just talking about overall league scoring. If it's low, the player who wins the Art Ross, which is the award for the player who scores the most points in the regular season, that player might win the award scoring like 90-some points, maybe 100 points. In medium, you could see high-end like 90, 92 plus overall players scoring those 120, 130 point seasons. And for high is like too high in my opinion. You could see players scoring 80, 90 goals, 170 plus points. I want to have some sort of middle ground of, yes, the McDavids are scoring 150, but then there are only like, 8 to 10 players scoring over 100 points, as it is in the real NHL. But no, if it's high, you're going to have 24 100-plus point scorers and players scoring 60, 70, 80 goals. If it's medium, it's so-so, but like a 97 overall McDavid might only score 95 points, if even. And then low is just too low in my opinion. So medium isn't great, but I keep it medium. Next up, draft class and generated prospect quality. This is for your drafts. You'll want to set these, if you do set them at all, it's up to you. You'll want to set them before the draft gets generated every September. So if you're starting year 1 of a franchise mode, you do it here. But if you're in, let's say, year 3 and you want to set it moving into year 4, then just be mindful that any time within year 3, including the postseason, the off-season, July, August, all the way up to when the calendar turns over for the preseason to begin, anytime before that calendar turns over, you could go into your settings and change the draft class and generated prospect quality. Now, what do these two things mean? It's just, again, additional information. This setting controls the frequency of a, quote, strong draft class occurring. So it would be a low, medium, or high level of strength of the overall draft class. As it says here, when set to high, stronger draft classes are generated more often. Or generated prospect quality. This setting controls the quality of prospect generated in the draft every year. When set to high, more top-end prospects are generated. So the way I understand it is the draft class quality is the overall strength of the class from 1st to 7th round, and the generated prospect quality is more for how many high-end players are in it. Are you getting how many numbers of franchises, high elites, medium elites, etc. And by the way, something that I'll do for draft class and prospect quality every season just to kind of keep things fresh and exciting is that I'll run a random number generator and I'll tell myself, okay, if it's between 1 and 100, I'll say 1 to 20 is low, 21 to 79 is medium, and 80 to 100 is high. I randomize a number and then it randomizes the draft class for me. So it could be that it's a low-high class, a high-medium class, a medium-high class, whatever it might be. But it keeps things from staying too average, I guess. Sometimes it could be low, could be high, could be back-to-back years of high, just like in the real world. That being said, if you're not bothered by it, keeping it medium for all 25 years of your franchise mode is not a problem either. And then finally, kind of going hand in hand with Sim Engine scoring would be Sim Engine shot frequency. The automatic setting, the default setting, is high. So it's just how often players are shooting. Will you have the Ovechkins of the world taking over 300 shots and stuff like that? If it's set to low, you have players who are supposed to be shooters based on what they do in the real world NHL, just not shooting very often. Less shots means less scoring. So to have an overall decent balance of scoring and goaltending, which is very hard to get, I would say medium Sim Engine with high shot frequency is the best way to go. Really not perfect, but probably the best way to go. If you go high, it's way too high. If you go low, it's way too low. Mix around, try and play with it if you'd like, but I recommend medium high for your franchise mode. Playoff length, playoff tiebreak, all that stuff for other settings here. Do you want pop-ups when the head coaches around the league are fired? Trade offer notifications, do you want those to be on or only when stars get offered to you, or just completely turned off? So if you're doing a lot of simulation, I'd recommend turning those off. Gameplay version is the latest. Waiver notifications, morale meetings if your morale is turned on. So if morale is turned on, it depends if you want to do this. It's a way to boost morale between players and coaches. I say they get super stale, super quick. So you could theoretically play with morale on, but turn off the meetings. I'd probably recommend doing that if you're going to play with morale on. And retired jerseys being on or off as well. The last thing to look at now, finally, half hour of settings. The final thing now would be the gameplay sliders. Now, I know a lot of people might come to this part of the video hoping for what's my secret formula for having perfect simulation. Sadly, I have no secret formula for you. A lot of people have all kinds of super deep, intricate calculations of, okay, backskating 47 and puck carrier agility to 82. That takes, in my opinion, way too much experimentation within a system that's broken. The gameplay, especially of NHL 25, is horrible. So I don't go in to watch much gameplay, nor do I play much gameplay. So I don't touch any of these sliders aside from just two of them. They're in the general, and number one would be attribute settings. The default setting is 5 on 10. I set it to 8 on 10. I would prefer that my 90 overall player performs like a 90 overall player more often than not just 5 out of 10. I don't want, like, yes, of course, there's some randomness, there's the storylines of it all, but I'd rather have 8 on a 10 for attribute effect, as it says on the right, the effects attributes will have on your players. If they have 95 shot blocking, I want them blocking shots. You know what I'm saying? And the other one would be the injury slider. For injuries, the default setting is 50 on 100. This will have you stopping the game for an injury, whether it be, even if you're just putting it to best lines. This will have your simulation stop to tell you about an injury at least about once a week between the NHL and the AHL. So if you have all the management things set to auto, then sure, go for it. Put it to 70, 80 plus on 100 to be more reflective of real world injuries. But if you will be managing your lineups and, oh, this guy got an injury, let me go fix the 4-on-4 power play, let me go fix the 3-on-3 penalty kill, all those little things that I do in my franchise mode, then you definitely want to have the injury slider somewhere between, I would say, about 12 and 18 on 100. The max I'd say is 20. Even then, it could be a bit too much. So I'd say probably a comfortable place is about 15. Then if you see it's too much or too little, you can play from there. But anywhere in that 12 to 13 to maybe like 18 to 20 range being the max, that's the range I play with injuries. If it's even in the 30s, but definitely 50 and more, like the default setting, you will very quickly become exhausted with injury management, especially between the NHL and the AHL. So those are my suggestions. Quick settings, advanced settings, and gameplay sliders. Don't forget about these last two things, accessibility and assisted strategies. In accessibility, you'll have things like color blindness, brightness, contrast, puck size, puck highlight, audio accessibility, controller accessibility, and chat accessibility, as well as over in assisted strategies, just a few things you can click on right here. And these have to do with when you go in-game, whether you be playing the game or watched as locked in on the coach. The game will give you suggestions to shorten the bench or call a timeout, depending on the situation. If you're down by 1 late, you might shorten the bench, and now the 4th line and 3rd D pair won't play anymore. It'll just be the top 3 lines and the top 2 defensive pairs. So they'll give you those suggestions if turned on. You don't need to accept them, but they'll at least give you the suggestion. And also the user strategy adjustment, as it on the right again, determines if the AI will change the strategy for the user based on game context. Minimum means no changes will occur. Maximum means aggressive changes. Personally, it could be at 6 on 6 and the game still doesn't know how to have high intensity. You could have the goalie pulled and your defenseman will just keep backing up as the player comes into your offensive zone and scores on the empty net. So do with that what you will. If you do go into your games, I'd probably make it 6 on 6, depends on if you're playing or what, so just another thing for you to decide based on how you play your franchise mode. Now, finally, you can press Start Career, but wait, there's more. Salary cap warning pops up. The game will always ask you this no matter what. Are you sure you want the salary cap on? The system will now fix some teams that are non-cap compliant before continuing. This is what I spoke about earlier with custom rosters and cap compliance. In franchise mode, let's say the Colorado Avalanche, for example, Gabriel Landeskog, in the real world is on long-term injured reserve. His contract is not currently counting against the Colorado Avalanche. Because the game can't reconcile that, they'll take Nathan MacKinnon, for example, who has $12.6 million as his contract, and to fit in Gabriel Landeskog, they will reduce every contract on the team, or all the big contracts, whatever you want to call it, by about $500K. So they'll reduce 14 players by $500K. Now Nathan MacKinnon is making 12.1 instead of 12.6. Now Mikko Rantanen is making 8.75 instead of 9.25, etc., etc. So if you want to keep the game from making those changes, you can download a roster that is cap compliant, or you can go into edit a player and fix the teams that are not cap compliant. As of the December 17th rosters, I believe only 5 teams are non-cap compliant. So check out this video right here. I'll put it in the top right corner in the card, as well as on the screen right in front of you. This video that I just made recently will tell you which teams those those are and what changes are recommended to keep things as balanced as possible. And even when those salaries are fixed, this message will still pop up, so don't be afraid. Just click Keep Salary Cap On and get your franchise mode started. So we arrive now at the Franchise Hub, which was one of the major changes for franchise mode NHL 25, as it now has a very different look from the previous franchise modes. First off, I want to say that the colors are not usually this dark. We chose the LA Kings, and that has a bit of a, they have a darker color scheme, so apologies for that. It's not usually this dark. Depends on what team you take. But previously, when you would go to the different tabs, they would bring up different screens in and of themselves. But now rotating through the tabs is easy on the left side of the screen. It's, it's in its own area while not affecting anything else on the screen in front of me. And the things that are always on your screen, you got three things right here. Number one, in the bottom left corner, you have the franchise overview. With owner mode on, this overview tells me a lot of different things. The profit, the arena level, the fan rating, happiness, blah, 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 owner goals. With owner mode turned off, it'll just tell you basically what the date is, when your next game is, stuff like that. So not super important unless you have owner mode turned on. And if you do have it turned on, you press L3, you can go to the franchise overview, which tells you last game attendance, owner's expected profit. A lot of things that are interesting, but like don't mean anything. Like, cool, the annual net profit is 107.858 million. If it was 0 or if it was 300 trillion, it makes no difference. So like, cool, thanks for telling me, but I'm not moved by it. The idea hasn't gripped me, in the words of Robert California. That being said, that's in the bottom left corner. Right in the middle of your screen, you see three things in one, I guess you could say. Number one is the calendar. So that shows you a couple days in the past as well as a few days in the future, upcoming games, things like that. The next game, so two cool 3D logos, here they are, team versus team, what arena you're playing at, what your record is, and what both teams' record over the last 10 games is, who the projected goalies are, so who are the two starters in this game, what are their records this season. And then on the right side, you have a few different screens you can rotate through, starting with matchup. This will compare the two teams in their league rank for goals for per game, goals against per game, power play, penalty kill percentages, as well as their team leaders in points or whatever other stat it might be. If you rotate through this with L2 and R2, you can see the league standings, Western Conference, Eastern Conference, and the 4 divisions, as well as your own team leaders for forward points, defense points, goals, assists, rookie points, and goalie wins. And finally, the league leaders for points, goals, assists, and goalie wins. So this is just essentially a much faster way to see league standings and player stats, instead of having to go into stats, player stats, league, and then finally get the answer. So it saves you from having to click 3 different things. So great, very handy. I like that a lot. That's on the right side of your screen. And as you can see at the bottom of your screen, division, standings, points leaders, goals leaders, all that will always be on a constant scroll at the bottom of the screen. Let's see, a couple more things for the Franchise Hub here. In the bottom left corner, you'll see the NHL logo next to the Options button on PlayStation 5. So if I click that button on my controller, it changes me to the American Hockey League, the AHL, telling me all the same things, but about my AHL team, what are their point leaders, what's going on there, what's their record, etc. That's a way to just take a quick look at your AHL squad. And in the top right corner, you see the triangle. So there are no games today. We'll see this better in a moment, but there are no games today. If I click on triangle, it will bring me not only to the games that are upcoming and the games that have already happened, but it will allow me to access the game logs, the box scores of those games. This is another new addition to NHL 25. We've been asking for it for years. I do think that it has slowed down the simulation speed by, I would say, about 90%, like it's twice as slow almost. So it has slowed down simulation quite a bit. It's a nice addition, but at what cost? So we'll talk more about that when we can actually access some game logs. But that's available for you in the top right corner if you press triangle. Also, a couple other quick things you can click on. If you press square, it brings you to the full calendar, aside from just seeing about 1 week of games. Pressing square, see, it takes so long to get pulled up on the screen. Pressing square will show you the entirety of the calendar. And if I back out and press on R3 on PlayStation 5 again, it will bring me to all of the team standings, league stats, all that stuff that I could click on as well. Just previously, instead of having to scroll down and click on it, just hitting R3 is a quick way to get there. So we'll get to all that later on as we now start working through each one of these options that you can click on in franchise mode. What does each one mean? What can you do? Let me walk you through it all. So sim to next game, sim to regular season, those are self-explanatory. We won't do that right now. Advanced day, also the same thing. Stats Central, instead of pressing on R3, you can click on Stats Central and it brings you back to this place right here where you look at team stats or player stats. We'll talk more about that once actually some simulation happens. Morale, if you have morale turned on, you can go to the morale screen by clicking on this right here. But if you want to check it out right here, you can see according to what players' morale is. You can sort by who's at the highest, who's at the lowest. What are they trending, up or down? Are they a leader? Are they neutral? Leaders, their effect is that having them on the team will boost team morale, and trading them away or stripping their captaincy or whatever else will hurt team morale. So locker room chemistry is at 61%. You want to see your locker room chemistry at 60, 70. That's a bit low, more like 70, 80+% in an ideal world. Over time, that will be built, but it can be destroyed so quickly that another reason why I just don't like it, as I explained earlier during the settings. If you want to hear more about what I had to say in chemistry, go back to the timestamp on settings for your franchise mode, and I gave my rationale on why I do and don't like it. Speaking of morale, I think my favorite comment of all time came from the NHL 23 guide last year, as a commenter said, "How come I say the word moral so weird? What is more-al?" So, hate to break it to everybody, but moral and morale are two different words, just to keep in mind. So morale, it's a good idea, but the conversations, the meetings, they're so stale, and it can just destroy a team so quickly that I keep it off. But if you want to look at the morale screen, like just how's everybody doing, is everybody happy, unhappy, or what, that's the screen to go to. Now at team management, we can start looking at trading, a very important part of franchise mode. There's proposed trade, find trade, and then at the bottom also the trade block. So let's check that out. Starting off with proposed trade. Even if you're brand new to franchise mode, I'm sure you know, just in sports in general, trades happen very often. And if you want to do your own trades, there's two things you got to look at. Number one, the trade value that you are trading out and the trade value that you are acquiring. And number two, whether or not the team wants to acquire that player / give up the player that you're wanting to get from them. So for example, let's take Kirby Dach for example. The Anaheim Ducks want Kirby Dach. He is green. If I go to Anaheim and say a player with even trade value, maybe Mason McTavish, let's say, this is a pretty even deal in terms of trade value. But if I press propose trade, it's going to be rejected, mostly because, almost if not exclusively because, the Ducks don't want to trade McTavish. Even though the value looks very even, if not a little bit in our favor, the Ducks don't want to trade McTavish. Maybe with easy trade difficulty, but with hard trade difficulty, that will not happen. What I will need to do, if just I'm looking to make trades, would be try to acquire players who are red. That means skaters who are matching the block. So if I scroll through a lot of teams, usually you won't find players with a ton of value, but here's like Fabian Lysell, for example, on the Bruins. Lysell, they want to move Lysell, they want Kirby Dach, but now the trade value is too little on my side. I could send it, but they'll still reject it. So I would have to add a little bit more on my side to make it happen. So if it wouldn't be hard, I would just have to add a little bit more value. If I throw in Justin Barron or something, this trade would go through guaranteed if I click propose trade. So what you need to keep in mind when you're trading is that yes, there's trade value, but there's also an underlying value that a player has for a team if they do or do not want to trade that player. If they want to acquire who you're sending, that's a bonus. If they want to trade who you're looking to acquire, that's a bonus. But if you're trying to trade a player that they don't want in exchange for a player that they don't want to give up, let's just say, for example, like a David Reinbacher, in theory they would want him, but just right now they don't want him, a Reinbacher for a Lindholm type of thing, this will never go through. If you want a trade like this to happen, you will have to be the one who gives up more trade value. Another way to increase trade value is by retaining salary. So if I want to trade Cole Caulfield to the Boston Bruins for some sacrilegious reason, whatever, just throw Charlie McAvoy in there, even though the money works in terms of both teams and their salary cap, one way to increase trade value to make it more desirable for the Bruins would be to retain salary. So if I click triangle on PlayStation, I can retain up to 50% of Cole Caulfield's contract, and I can retain money on up to 2 contracts at a time. So I went ahead and retained 50%, and that increased his trade value, especially as an 8-year contract. To have him at 50% retained, that would be very valuable. Now, if I were to go to the Bruins, not Charlie McAvoy, but I don't know, I guess Lindholm again, and try to make this trade happen, even though I'd say the trade value is in their favor, because I retain salary, it makes it a bit more likely that it'll happen. Not a guarantee, but more likely. On the flip side, if you try to acquire a player and make that team retain salary, let's go to the Red Wings, for example. I want to get JT Compher from you, but he's making $5.1 million for the next 5 years. Even if I want you to retain not even 50%, say 25%, $1.25 million, and I'm going to give you someone with even trade value, Kirby Dach, and yeah, Kirby Dach for JT Compher at 1.25 million retained. They want to move Compher, but it won't go through. On the surface, we like this trade. If I don't retain any salary, they will do this trade. But because I asked them to retain salary, they won't do it. Now, granted, I'm asking them to retain 25% on a 5-year contract, but just to say, when it comes to retaining salary in franchise mode on NHL 24 and even previous NHLs, it is almost impossible to get a team to retain salary. 500K? Nope. Even if I go all the way down to, let's say, is it crazy if I just say 25K? 25K? Still rejected. So they would do this trade at no retention. But if I say retain $25,000 for 5 years, a total of $125,000, they will not do the trade. So if you want to have a team retain salary, you need, once again, to give up way more value. I'd have to give like Kirby Dach and a third or a second to make Detroit just retain a fraction of a percent. So you retaining salary is very valuable, but having the other team retain salary is very hard to do. Even if they want to trade that player, the more term that player has, the harder it will be. But even for $25,000 sometimes in a deal that makes perfect sense, the game will just not do it. So that's very frustrating. Actually, before I exit, a couple more things I want to show you. You can also trade draft picks, and you can see that their value is pretty fair. The first round pick has a lot more than a second round pick, so feel free to use those as you see fit. You can trade picks up to 5 years away, so you can go up to the 2029 draft. You have your first all the way to your 7th round pick if your team is fully stocked. And finally, when you're making a trade and you're looking through teams in the NHL, there's a few things to look at on the right side of the screen. The status, first and foremost, at the bottom. If a team is a seller, they're more likely to be looking for picks, to be looking for young players, stuff like that. If a team is a buyer, like the Bruins here, they'd be more looking at, roster players and things that can help them right now. And they're also more likely to be trading out prospects. So if you want to keep things realistic, I always limit myself. I try not to trade for prospects from sellers or conservative sellers, and I try not to trade for like good top 6 forwards, let's say, from a team that's a buyer. That's one way you can also keep things realistic in your franchise. You can look at the number of contracts they have. If you need to trade 2 players, you'll need to find a team that has 48 out of 50 contracts or less, as 49 or 50 on 50 wouldn't be able to acquire them. And you also look at quickly what some of the pieces they have on the block. They could have like a dozen or close to 24 pieces on the block, but they can just see the top 3 on the side right there if you're just scrolling through quickly. And of course, you can also see their salary cap, how much money do they have available. If you need to trade out a lot of money, you can see which teams are even in play and what is their current record. If you only want to look at teams that are realistically looking at, let's say they'd be sellers or buyers, even if their status isn't realistic, if they're at the bottom of the league and they're listed as buyers, well, you can use your logic and say, no, they should actually be sellers. So that's the proposed trade screen. That's when you're making your own trade. If you just want an idea of a trade, you can also look at find trade. And by the way, you see Lane Hudson on the team. He's not actually on the Canadiens in game. It's because I'm using my custom roster, so don't get confused. So let's say I do want to trade Kirby Dach. We've been looking at him a few times. I can click on Kirby Dach when on the find trade screen. I can click 2 things. I can click L1, as you can see at the bottom, to find a trade on the open block, or just triangle to find a trade. If I click triangle to find a trade, it will try to find me trades according to what my trade block desires are. And I'll show you the trade block in a moment. So it gives me only 3 options. A couple seconds from the Hurricanes, a second and a third from the Blue Jackets, or a second and a third and Aiden Hill from Vegas. But if I go on the open block, which means I'm open to taking whatever teams would give me, now I have 15 trades available to me. So I always go on the open block. A few more possibilities are open to me. Even if I didn't say I wanted a top 4 defenseman, now I'm seeing the offers that include a top 4 defenseman. Unfortunately, it doesn't give you every possible trade that could happen, as even then, it'll only give you players that teams want to trade out. I won't be offered a trade of a player that has no highlight on their name. It'll always be a player and or a pick that a team has highlighted in red as someone or something that they want to move out. So that's if you want to find a trade. Usually if you put too much value, it becomes impossible. So I only do that for like average trades. If I want to make a big splash, oftentimes just teams don't have that much value on their trade blocks, so it just won't happen. Even if it's a trade that would go through, it's not a trade that will be offered to you because high value players are not usually on the trade block. Speaking of the trade block, if I scroll down on the trade and improve screen and click on the trade block, I can edit my own wants and assets that are on the block. Caden Primo, Armia, and some picks here are on the block. I can add and remove them, do what I want. I can also say, what is my surplus? I want to move out thirds and fourth round picks. And what are my wants? Do I want first, seconds, and thirds and all picks? Do I want defensemen? Do I want forwards? Do I want certain age or certain potentials of those different things? I can, and even look, I took Caden Primo off the block, the trade block, and now his morale went up. I don't know how he would know that, but there you go. So I can change those things, and this will affect the types of trades that are offered to me. They won't get much better, but they will affect the types of trades that are offered to me. So you can go ahead and change your own trade block as well as browse the trade blocks of other teams. I personally never go to this screen. I'll just go to the proposed trade screen and scroll through the teams and see who's highlighted in red, as opposed to seeing like 3 or 4 players at a time having to scroll sideways. Plus, at the same time, it only shows me the top 5 assets on the trade block, when some teams, like I said, could have a dozen or close to 24 assets when it comes to all their picks, all their prospects that they have available. Or look at what are their surpluses, what are their wants, and what draft picks do they currently want or have future wants for. So I'd much rather look at it through the proposed trade screen as opposed to looking at the browse trade block screen, which I find just isn't very useful. So in NHL 25, you'll find all that information under the Trade and Improve tab on the left side of your screen. Now, the one difference in NHL 25 from everything that I've been saying for NHL 24 in terms of trades is that NHL 25 now includes trade clauses. Modified no trade clauses, no trade clauses, no move clauses. Those are all now integrated from real-world players who already have them, as well as ones that you'll give out in your contract negotiations we'll talk about in a little bit later. To put it simply, a trade clause gives a player control over what you can do with them. So for example, let's say I wanted to trade Drew Doughty. He has a modified no trade clause, as I see under the clause column right here, the green MNTC, modified no trade clause. If I select him and scroll down his player profile down to contract info, I can see that he has a 25-team no trade list. A modified no trade clause could be different things. It could be a 4-team no trade list, a 25-team no trade list. So of the 32 NHL teams, do a little bit of math. If it's a 25-team no trade list, therefore there are 7 tradable teams. These are not the actual 7 tradable teams that Drew Doughty has in the real world, but the game has randomized 7 teams that Drew Doughty could be traded to, which would be different every time you start a new franchise mode save file. So Drew Doughty is signed on for 3 more years, and be careful, the clause could change from year to year, but for all 3 years of his contract, it's a 25-team no trade list, and he could always only be traded to the Bruins, Blackhawks, Canadiens, Rangers, Flyers, Maple Leafs, or Canucks. So if I'm trying to trade him to the Anaheim Ducks right now, and I select him right here, I'm not able to just put him in the trade. If I want to put him in the trade, I must have a conversation with him. We'll get more into conversations later, but this part of the conversation, since it's all kind of intertwined together, it's hard to make it like one section and this is only conversations. But if we can focus for a moment on the trade clause portion of the conversations, I can have a conversation with Drew Doughty and say, listen, let's chat about the clause in your contract. A chat would be, let's try and play around with it. A waive would mean, let's entirely take it out. I want you to waive your trade clause, and I could trade you to any of the 32 NHL teams. As you can see in the center of your screen about there, persuasion success, very risky. There's a very low chance that Drew Doughty will fully waive his trade clause to say, okay, I'm willing to be moved to any team in the league. It doesn't really have anything to do with how they've been doing performance-wise or how the team is doing. It will always be very risky if it says very risky. There's nothing I can say, okay, well, we lost just 20 in a row and he's the worst player on the team. If it still says very risky, it's very risky. And the other impact to this is whether or not he says yes, it will be a -10 guaranteed to his management morale. What does that really mean? If morale is turned off, I wouldn't care about it at all. With morale turned on, you do want to be a little bit careful, I would say. But if I want to say, okay, let's just chat about your clause. I'm not sure why it says yes, a 10-team trade list when we just saw a 7-team trade list, but there are some of the glitches, I suppose. So what about my clause? Are you able to update me, provide me with an updated list of the teams you would like to be traded to? I believe that might just mix up some of the teams that he's able to be traded to, but it wouldn't change the actual number of teams that he could be traded to. And now how about I could say, is there another team that you'd be willing to be traded to? So instead of 7, could I put it up to 8? And now you've seen persuasion success success, this would be convincing. So I'm not asking him to be traded. I'm not saying anything like that. It will be -10 to his management morale, but instead of a 7-team trade list, it will now be an 8-team trade list. If I ask for 2, then it's 2. If I ask for 3, then it's 3 more. Or then, again, waive entirely. So it's very risky to ask for him to add 3 teams or to waive it entirely. So whether it be just 3 more teams or 20 more teams, they're both very risky options. However, if I ask him for just 1 team or 2 teams, it is convincing. His preference is also very risky, so I wouldn't risk just changing up the teams. I would say if I'm trying to really trade someone I really want off my team, but it's tough because they have such a difficult clause, especially if it's a full no move clause, just asking for 1 or 2 teams. You may as well ask for 2 because it's always going to be convincing either way. 1 or 2 teams is more often than not going to be successful. It won't always be successful, but if I ask for 2 right here, there you go, persuasion success. I've been feeling down, a bit down here, and I've already made a decision. I'll submit my list right now. Okay, great. I'm sorry that had to come to this. It's for the best, blah, blah, blah. So now if I exit out of the conversation, I go to Drew Doughty, it still is it's still not Anaheim, so sadly I couldn't add him to this deal that I was looking for in theory with the Ducks, but I could go into his player profile, scroll down to contract information, I see 9 teams, so 2 more teams have been added to the list. But keep in mind, if he has multiple seasons of a trade clause, what you just did in that conversation will only be good for that 1 season. His 25-team no trade list has become a 23-team no trade list, but only for the current year. If I never end up trading him, those 2 extra teams that he added will be removed starting next season, 2025-26, and then again in 26-27, it will revert back to a 25-team no trade list and only 7 tradable teams once again. So that's a no trade clause or a modified no trade clause. Like I said, if you try to add him to a trade, it won't let you do it basically. But if I go to a team that he is tradable to, like the Chicago Blackhawks we just saw, and now I click on Doughty, he can be added to the trade screen here, no problem. So there you go on no trade clauses, but how about no movement clauses? No movement clauses not only mean that you can't trade the player, but also means you can't send them down to the AHL. You can't bury their contract. A no trade clause just means no trade. It doesn't mean that I can't move you to my farm team, but a full no move clause means they're not going anywhere from your NHL lineup, unless, again, you have that conversation with them. Even Anze Kopitar, a franchise pillar, if I go to him and I say, can you just add 1 or 2 teams? Again, it's not a guarantee, but it's gone from very risky to risky. So I'm not always certain of when it goes from convincing to risky, but it will always be easier, not a guarantee, but always easier to ask for 2 teams instead of 3 teams or more. So I asked Kopitar for 2 teams, it was not good, caught me off guard, I'm doing good, I'm not looking to leave, no problem, and I also have to deal with the -10 to management morale. Okay, so that's how to deal with any trade clauses or movement clauses within the trade screen in franchise mode. And on the flip side of that, if I'm trying to acquire a player who has a no trade clause, like let's say Zach Werenski, full no movement clause, nope, I just don't even have the option to click on him. As you see in the bottom left, I can't even click X on Zach Werenski. And if it's for a player who has a modified no trade clause, Boone Jenner, I can select him because on his list, which I don't know of, this was fixed in one of the more recent patches, I don't know his list, but I do know that's an 8-team no trade list. So therefore, I know that let's say I'm the LA Kings right now, I am one of the 24 teams that he can be traded to. That's the only problem though. I don't know which one are yes or no. So if I really want a player who has a modified no trade clause, I kind of just got to cross my fingers and hope. So if I find another team here, maybe let's say Detroit, Alex DeBrincat, he's on the list. I can press X. But then here you go. You see I come to the New York Islanders and I cannot click on Matty Barzal. And you see what the difference is between him and Brock Nelson? It's that in that little green modified no trade clause box, if there's an arrow, it means that they're tradable to me. If there's no arrow next to the M, that means they're not tradable to me. So that's a good little trick for it. Instead of you having to go into every player and seeing, are they on the list, are they not on the list, it's nice just to see, is that arrow there or not when you're scrolling through the clauses in the trade screen. We'll get more into clauses when we talk about things like contract negotiations and free agency, but for the trades, whether you're trading out or acquiring a player with a clause, that's how it works now in NHL 25. That being said, we'll flip it back now to NHL 24. So after everything to do with trading, we can now look at the coaching staff. If you have everything set to manual and you are in charge of your coaching staff, you'll have the power to promote, to demote, and to fire according to whatever you want. So when I go to the coaching staff screen here, I'll see my generated coaching staff that I am given to start the franchise mode. And I'll just very quickly interject here with NHL 25. Now with the newer roster updates, any roster update that you use after the month of November will have the real world real-world coaches in the game. So all 32 NHL coaches are now here, including Jim Hiller, let's say, for the LA Kings. I believe, unless I'm mistaken, I'm 99% certain, all the real-world coaches are at least A- rated or higher. So previously in NHL 24, it could be that you got bad luck and you start with a B+ coach or something. But I believe with all the real coaches now in-game, you should be starting your franchise mode with the actual coach. The rest of the staff is going to be generated. All these fake guys over here, these guys aren't real. Look at that haircut. But for your head coach, they should be A- rated or above, and they should be the real coach in the National Hockey League. You want to have at least an A- coach, in my opinion, even if that coach has a perfect fit. If I look at their team fit, this guy is 66%. Even if they have a good fit, you want a coach that is at least A- rated in terms of his overall. A-, A+, that's what you're looking for, and it will impact your team performance. So having a high overall coach is important, and if you don't have one, getting one sooner rather than later in your franchise mode would be helpful. So then you have your associate coach, your assistant coach, your goalie coach, and the same thing in the AHL. In terms of your coaching staff, you need to always have a head coach and an associate coach in both the NHL and the AHL. If you don't, the game will automatically hire one for you. But for the assistant coach and the goalie coach, you could leave those empty if you so choose. What do the associate and assistant and goalie coaches do? Honestly, it's hard to say exactly, but it seems to be, in my experience and from anecdotal evidence from other franchise mode players, that having coaches in those roles who have high teaching attributes and high coach influence attributes will add to the overall development of your players and the maintenance of your players overall as they get older, just to keep everybody playing as well as they can be playing. Now, when it comes to the coach's teaching specialty, it is exactly that. Teaching specialty. Be careful. Don't be tempted to think, oh, I have a forwards coach. Oh, I'm getting scored on too often. That's why my coach is a forwards coach. Or the opposite. Oh, my coach is a defense coach. That's why we're not scoring enough goals. That is not the case. This is the coach's teaching specialty, which means if I have a particular prospect in my system, let's say a forward who I'm trying to develop on my team, having a forwards coach for my forward prospect will help him to develop better. Same thing for defensemen. If I have a defenseman coach and I have a very good defensive prospect who I want to develop on my team, that coach will help him to develop better. It's not his style of play, it's his teaching specialty. So for a generalist, it's good. All your players will develop on average quite well. I think that's good to have. A forward coach will give more preference to the development of a forward. Same for defensemen, same for goalies. If I look at the coach themselves and I look at what is their style, all the way on the right next to their overall, I see style is balanced, style is offensive, style is physical, style is defensive. That's where you can look a bit more into why is my team performing a certain way. But even then, the style isn't the end-all be-all. Really, it's what their offensive and defensive attributes are. So this head coach here is balanced, but even if he was offense or defense, it doesn't matter. A+ offense, A+ defense, it doesn't get better than that. So I don't care if this coach's style is offensive or defensive, we will still have good offense and good defense because they're both rated at A+. Plus, he's a generalist coach. This is like the best case scenario. A generalist coach who has a balanced style and A+ for both offense and defense. Yeah, this is absolutely the best case scenario. And even under teaching specialty, you can see it. Teaching specialty of generalists will help develop and grow all players on your team, grow forwards on your team, grow goalies on your team, grow defensemen on your team, and whether or not those types of players can go up or down in potential. So don't be fooled by the teaching specialty. It's very different from the style. And even then, really what matters most are the attributes. Beyond that, if you want to look at what that coach's team fit is, that's also very important. A bad team fit isn't the end of the world, as chemistry can still be good with X factors, as we'll get into later. But a good team fit helps to minimize the necessity of having players with X factors. If I already have a team with a good fit, I don't need to pile on the X factors to get good chemistry. Already I see Suzuki, I see Caulfield, I see Doc, I see Matheson. They're already having a very good fit in their positions, which I would assume would be first line and first D pairing respectively there. So they're already in a good spot. When looking at team fit, also keep in mind this is that player's fit in that exact spot in the lineup. So Nick Suzuki's fit right now with his coach is very good. It's a high fit. But that's as first line center, not his fit on the Montreal Canadiens with this coach, it's his fit on the first line as center with this coach. If I were to move him to a different line or put him in a different position, his fit would change. This bar next to his name would go up or down. So when looking to hire a coach and looking for a coach with a good team fit, keep in mind that that fit is with this exact lineup, with these players on these lines, not the potential of, oh, this player has a horrible fit, but that's as third line left wing. If you put him second line left wing, maybe he has a full bar perfect fit. So that's why take team fit with a bit of a grain of salt. Really what's most important is the coach's overall. So 66% team fit is great. Usually in my experience, a good team fit is something around 60% plus. If you get into the 70s, that's incredible. But 40%, 50%, you might have a hard time getting good lines and getting good chemistry if you're at that low of a fit. But it would be worth it with this type of coach. If this were my coach with A pluses and balanced and generalist, but he had like a 50% fit, I would still keep him because he has an A overall and all those other things. So team fit is a good bonus, but don't look at team fit first and foremost. Number one is what is the coach's overall. Number two, what are his attributes? Number three, what is his teaching specialty? Those are the three most important things in that order, in my opinion. And keep in mind, if you keep a coach for multiple seasons, although his preferences will never change, his overall and the accompanying attributes will improve over time. Staff chemistry is also important for team performance. 87% is really good. Oftentimes, the best teams will have staff chemistry of 70, 80% plus. If it's at 40, 50%, even if your coaches are highly rated, that could affect the performance of your team. So let's say, is there anyone who's worse down here? Not really, but let's say, for example, this D-rated goalie coach had poor morale. He's lowly rated. I'm going to go ahead and fire this coach. Lewis Craig, get out of here. Team morale or staff morale drops to 81%. I click on options to go hire a coach. But if auto staff management was turned on, I wouldn't have been able to do that. So make sure auto staff management is turned off. So let's say now I want to go and hire a coach. Be careful. For some reason, NHL goalie coaches are not listed. I'd have to go hire an assistant coach into a goalie coach role. So I'd find somebody I like, I'd go ahead and hire them, I'd say that they're going to be my goalie coach and send the offer. But here's the thing, I need to hire a goalie coach, but this guy wants to be an assistant coach. So if I offer him goalie coach, it could be that he says, I don't like that role. So what you need to often do is a game of musical chairs. That's why I always keep one goalie coach spot open in the AHL. I usually fire my AHL goalie coach. I don't even have usually an AHL goalie coach because I need to have one spot open for musical chairs. So what I would do now, for example, I would go out and look for a good coach, maybe even someone that's B- rated, and I would try to hire them as associate coach. I would demote my associate coach down to AHL goalie coach, hire that new coach to be my NHL associate coach, demote my assistant coach to a goalie coach or whatever, then promote the AHL goalie coach back up to NHL assistant coach. You got to just play around with it because you can't hire a position that's already filled. In the NHL, you can do that. I could, let's say, for example, I want a new head coach. I can make someone an interim head coach. So if I go out and hire a head coach, that would bump this coach out and make him whatever, associate coach if that spot is open once the head coach is hired. But for some unknown reason, for years, the AHL head coach does not give you that possibility. If I try to make an AHL interim head coach, it does not allow me to do it. But if I try to leave the screen to go hire an AHL coach, they'll say, oh, you need to have an AHL coach. But I need to go and leave the screen to hire an AHL coach. And I can't hire one unless that spot is open. If I try to hire one, he'll say there's already one in his space. So again, you need to play musical chairs. You need to demote your NHL goalie coach, hire an AHL head coach to be your NHL goalie coach, then demote your AHL head coach, demote your NHL goalie coach, who's actually your AHL head coach, to AHL head coach, then promote your former AHL head coach, who was down to your AHL goalie coach, into AHL associate. Oh my goodness. Does it not make your head break? It's ridiculous what we have to do here. This has not been fixed. It's been years that this has been a problem. So I just try not to touch the AHL staff too often. I've been rambling so long, but that's the process that it is. It's a wild game of musical chairs if you want to change around some staff members. So I try to not change it too much. I usually offer my staff 8-year contracts. So I don't need to really touch it only once every 8 years. and that's about it. So those are the coaches, but before we get into the scouts, jumping back to NHL 25 now, a new feature in NHL 25 is the ability to have these conversations that include goal setting. Now, previously, your conversations with the coach were pretty uninspiring, in my opinion. Hey, we need to be doing this more often. Make a trade for this player. Okay, I promise to make this trade. You are now the boss of my life. Hey, you did not make that trade. Now I am angry with you. Oh no. So now these conversations at the very beginning of your franchise mode, it won't be available to you yet. You need to advance one day if it's day one of the absolute first time you've entered your franchise mode. You need to have that first initial conversation with your coach. New conversation, it'll pop up. You start the conversation. Hello, GM. Together we have a great opportunity. These paragraphs always make me laugh. And essentially, at the start of the season, you have three options. You can say, hey, let's set some season goals. Let's set some preseason goals. Or let me just let you take the wheel. You do whatever you want. And it's a +10 for management morale. Honestly, I don't mind just doing this, get the +10 and move on, and I have to break my head with something else. But setting a season goal is not a bad thing. I'll get into the player goal setting after I'm finished with the coaches here. But for the coach, if you want to set a season goal or a preseason goal, there's a couple of options for you. So a preseason goal for you first would be, okay, sounds good. What should the main focus be? So in the preseason, I want you to focus on conditioning. Now, the focus will give them a +3 to +5 in endurance, a +1 to +3 in acceleration, a +1 to a +2 in speed, but a -3 or a -2 in puck control. So it's not all gravy here. Any focus that you want your coach to implement on the team will have a positive and negative effect. That's one reason why I don't do preseason focuses myself, but if you'd like to, absolutely go for it. Just be mindful of the negatives. For strength training, get pluses in strength, body checking, and aggression, but negatives to discipline. For skill training, get deking, puck control, and hand-eye, but negative for the awarenesses. Awarenesses, by the way, have a huge impact on player overall. So you could say, hey, I want to focus on skill training, and then your players drop in overall, but they go up in their attributes. So don't be afraid of that either. 5v5, you'll get increases to puck control, defense, and offensive awareness, but negatives to speed. This is a great way if you just want to boost the overall. It won't mean much, but if you just want a vanity rating to go up a little bit, this is a good way to do it because the offensive and defensive awarenesses are what matter the most usually. Power play, I want pluses to passing, hand-eye, and wrist shot accuracy, but negatives to defensive awareness. Penalty kill, I want stick checking, shot blocking, and defensive awareness, but lower to offensive awareness. Video sessions, offensive, defensive awarenesses, but then negatives to wrist and slap shot power. It's probably the worst one. And team bonding, which is +5 to 10 for management and teammate morale. Oh, we can't forget the goalie focused, which would be pluses to glove high, glove low, stick sides, blah, blah, blah. But negatives to wrist shot and slap shot accuracy. So, okay. So because my goalies are working harder, my players must suffer. I see. So there you go. You can choose one of those focuses if you would like. If you click on the preseason goal, you're pretty much locked into having to choose one, which is unfortunate. So I just say, hey, let's do, I don't know, strength training. Discipline, taking a -2 is not the end of the world to me. It's probably one of the better ones you could choose. And then, okay, sounds good to me, all of our players. Now, what about a season goal? After whether you've done a preseason goal or not, you can also have a season goal. Now, your season goal could be something like making the playoffs, and if it is, you get 1,000 coach influence XP, woohoo, and +10 management morale, yeah! If you make the final, wow, +2,000 and +20 management morale, or no expectations, and again, -10 for saying that. So don't go into this and say no expectations. I don't see any reason to not set a goal of making the playoffs or making the Stanley Cup final. If you're a good team, go for it. If you're just a so-so team, go for the playoffs. Why not? Try and get the extra coach influence. If you don't reach it, then it's not the end of the world. No one's going to be mad at you. So I'll just say, hey, I agree. Let's make the playoffs. There you go. End conversation. Done with the coach. So that's the day one conversation / the conversation you'll get at the beginning of every season. I usually just say, you take care of it, +10 to management, I move on. Once that conversation has been had, if you go down to the conversations tab, aside from being able to talk to your players, you can also talk to the head coach at any given time. If you go in at a random moment without a conversation being prompted to you, you can say, hey, let's talk about the game plan for this team. Okay, what do you have in mind? Now, this is currently locked because the season hasn't started yet, so I'll get into it later on. But in the preseason, you can talk about scheme fit and coaching style as well. For coaching style, I believe it will always be very risky, so be mindful if you want to ask your coach to change up their strategies and stuff like that. Maybe as a last-ditch effort, if you say, hey, this coach is really not working for my team, either you change your style or I'm firing you. That's probably the only time I would ask this because it's very risky otherwise. Also, there's scheme fit, which is, again, very risky. That's another last-ditch effort type of thing I would try because as I can see with the current fit of Hiller, it's about maybe like a 50-some% fit on this team. If I'm about to fire him and I hate the fit, then hey, may as well try to get the scheme fit or coaching style changed up before I can him. But yeah, both always very risky. What's very convincing is the preferred lines and the ice time allocation, which actually, you know what, I'll exit out and get to the regular season so I can actually show you that. So end conversation here. Let's get to the regular season so I can show you that, and then I'll come back to player conversations. So I'll start simulating towards the regular season so we can get the preseason over with. Budget allocation, yeah, that's stuff for owner mode. Morale stuff is happening, injured, healthy, up and down, salary cap compliance, players are on waivers. Make sure you make any of your decisions for players who have to go through waivers, make those decisions before October 3rd. Because once waivers are in effect and I want to send down a player on my team who is waiver eligible, doing so will allow every other team in the league a chance to claim that player. So be very mindful of that deadline on October 3rd. You can send players up and down as you like in the preseason, but once the regular season hits, you can no longer do that. So now, here I am in the conversations. I can talk to Hiller about what we want to do here in the regular season. Game plan, here we go. So I see preferred lines and ice time allocation. For preferred lines, reading this off here, speak to the coach about any spot in the lineup and select a player that will be locked into that spot when using head coach preferred lines within the edit line screen or through injury notifications. So if, for example, you have 3 centermen, let's go over preferred lines. I'll show you a real example. Setting lineup is usually my responsibility, but I'm open to your input, blah, 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 blah. Great. So let's say I want to have a forward always locked in at, let's say, second line center. So I say, okay, second line center, let's go to line 2, and I want to talk about who's always playing center. It could be, let's say I choose, okay, it could be that Anze Kopitar, for some reason, even though he's my first line center, I always want him on my second line. Due to his overall being 89, I believe, if I press best lines in my lineup, the coach will always put Kopitar as my first line center. But if for whatever reason I really want him on the second line, he fits better, the line mates, whatever it might be, I can lock Kopitar or whoever else the game offers me. They offer me most players. Yeah, look at all these. They offer me pretty much everyone in this lineup. I can lock in Anze Kopitar to that spot when I press best line, so that everyone around him, the wingers, the first line, whatever, those will be built according to overall and chemistry fit, except for the player who I've locked in, and that is Anze Kopitar to second line center. Do you have additional adjustments in mind for the second forward line? Yes. I always want his left winger, let's say, to be Alex Laferriere, and then I always want his right winger to be, let's scroll through it here, I want it to always be Kevin Fiala, despite his overall and all that. Do you have any additional adjustments in mind for line 2? No, I made those adjustments. Good to go. New topic. We can go back to the first line, second line, third line, fourth line, or I can back out of forwards and talk about the defense as well. Power play, penalty kill, all of that. I can lock players into where I want them to be. Now, it's a great idea, but I don't know why I need to go through a super long conversation and click through 3 different things. I'm happy to talk about this. What would you like to talk about? Line 2, what about line 2? Who do you want for the center position? I want this player. Okay, now I do it again. Who do you want for line 2? Who do you want for left wing? Why can't I just go to my lineup? I just go to the edit line screen, and whenever I have a player that I want in that position, I just click, boop, lock. One button, boop, lock. Why can't I just press triangle and this guy is now locked here? You know what I'm saying? So now Laferriere, Kopitar, and Fiala will always be my first line. If I put Trevor Lewis up here, and I put Turcotte here, whatever, and I press best lines, everything will change except for the second line. It always stays Laferriere, Kopitar, and Fiala. So throughout the season, when you have a ton of injuries that happen to you, it's super helpful to say, listen, I built this lineup for a reason. I want these guys where I put them, and now they're locked into this spot no matter what happens. It's super annoying that it takes that big conversation to do it, and that's only for 1, 2, or 3 players. Imagine your entire lineup, right? So it is way more tedious than it has to be, but at least now it's included in franchise mode. So I'll talk more about editing your lines, building chemistry, player movement, and all that when I switch it back to NHL 24. But while I'm still on NHL 25 and talking about conversations, let's go from coach conversations to player conversations. Now, I've already advanced past the preseason, so I can't do any goal setting. So let's just bring it back a second to when the preseason conversations were available. Okay, so back in the preseason now, if we go to the Conversations tab, we see that each player has season goals next to their name. If I talk to a big name player like an Anze Kopitar, we could talk about a few different things, such as a season goal, their on-ice play, or of course, like we said earlier, clause option, waiving your trade clause, etc. But this is like an all-encompassing place for conversations. It could be about trades, it could be about them. You just go and you start the conversation. Instead of having to seek out the player in the morale screen, you just go to the conversation tab, click on the player, and talk about whatever you want to talk about. So season goals, on-ice play, there's a couple of options that are new to NHL 25 now. So between season goals and on-ice play, let's get into this. Let's start with season goals, I suppose. Why not? Let's discuss what we expect of you this season and determine your main focus. Use season goals to give challenges to your players to gain attributes, X factors, and potential. So if I say, okay, sounds good, what's the game plan? We can set a short-term goal or a long-term goal with any player. A short-term goal is always the first half of the season, so I suppose that's just 41 games, and the long-term goal is always the entirety of the season. So let's say, I don't know, long-term goal, why not? If it's a long-term goal, we can have an award challenge as well, because a short-term goal, obviously, there's no awards to be won in the first half of the season. And if it's a long-term goal, there can be stat challenges, award challenges, or X-Factor challenges. A stat challenge will say, I want you to hit a certain number of goals, or assists, or plus-minus, or blocked shots, and you get a plus to the attributes. I hope I can back out if I go click on this. Can I? Yes, I can. Okay, so I can show you all this stuff. I just want to commit to one option. So, Anze Kopitar, score 30 goals, and you'll get between a +1 and a +3 to your wrist and slap shot accuracy. Now, what's very good here is that you don't need to hit 30 goals exactly. It's not that, oh, you scored 29 and now you're junk. If he does get, I don't know, EA's never told us the exact number, but they say if he gets close to the goal, he'll still possibly get some of the benefits. So maybe hitting 30 goals would have given him a +2 or a +3, and because he got 26 goals, he's getting a +1 to his shooting accuracies. Sadly, there's no definitive answer to how close they need to get to the goal, but keep in mind it doesn't have to be exactly that number for them to see any benefits. Score 40 assists, get a +1 to a +4 in passing. It seems as though the player type will determine the goals. Like if I ask this to a sniper, the challenge for goals might be 50 goals. So it seems to be determined by the player type and not necessarily what that player's attributes are or their history when it comes to how they sim and how they produce offense. And it could be get a ± of +25 or more, and that would be for the defensive awareness. Block 1 shot per game on average, and you'll get a +1 or 2 to shot blocking. Have a face-off percentage of 55+ and get a +2 to your face-offs, and that would be stat goals. Now I can also set on, go back to season goals. I can also set long-term again, back out, blah blah blah, an award challenge. Now Anze Kopitar, if you win the Rocket Richard Trophy, you're going to get plus wrist shot accuracy, wrist shot power, increased shot frequency, and +10 management morale. Whoa, the +10 really put me over. If you win the Art Ross, you'll get blah blah blah. If you win the Selkie, you'll get blah blah blah. The Heart, and that's it. So any award they're eligible to win. A defenseman will be different awards, but for a forward, Rocket Richard, Art Ross, Selkie, and Heart. Those are the awards you can win, and that if you do, it would give you those positives to those attributes. Now back one more would be the X Factor challenge. If you hit these certain things, and actually, okay, so it only offers me one for Anze Kopitar. The only X Factor that he could get, I guess it's because he already has a bunch of them, he does not have the quick draw X Factor. So hey, Anze Kopitar, if you win 1,000 face-offs this season, let's take this skill to the next level. Monaco Challenge, you can be trusted, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so if you, basically that's it. If you get 1,000 face-offs won, you'll get the quick zone, the quick draw zone ability. So I guess it's already a superstar ability. That's what's the problem with talking with a player who's already great. So he did have that superstar ability, my apologies. He has the X Factor already, but it's not gold. So for Anze Kopitar, if I go and click on, let's go and look at Anze Kopitar for a quick second. He has a bunch of X Factors, but the zone ability, or should I say the superstar ability of quick draw is just that. It is not the gold zone ability. So I'm talking to a player who already has a ton of stuff, but if I talk to a player who doesn't have as much, let's scroll down a little bit more. Let's click on a Laferriere, for example. Goals for him might be a little bit different. Same thing, season goals. I want to talk to you. Let's set a long-term goal for you. And it's, yeah, same things, because he's a high enough overall that the goal won't be, hey, try and make the team. If I talk to like a 70-some, could be different. So anyways, if I click on X Factor for him, okay, 1T. Score 15 power play goals, you get the 1T. Score 30 goals, you get the Schneip. Score 3 hat tricks, you get Shock and Awe. So that's all cool stuff there. Quick draw, again, you're not a centerman, so win 750 faceoffs for the superstar ability, win 1,000 faceoffs for the zone ability, different thresholds to reach. I like that. Now for on-ice play, doesn't work as well with him. Let me save that for just a moment. Let me find a younger player, because it's going to go into something called adaptability. The younger a player is, the more adaptable they are. So let's go for actually like a Brandt Clark. Brandt Clark is a rookie. Brandt Clark, let's talk to you. So Brandt Clark, let's go back to season goals. Let's say long-term goal again. And so, sorry, just to show you, X Factor challenge is similar. Like Shock and Awe, score 3 hat tricks, but you're a defenseman. But if I go to, again, season goals, it's always a long thing to have to scroll through. And I go to award challenge as a defenseman. Now it'll say, I want you to win only one of any of these awards. Win the Calder, the Richard, the Art Ross, the Hart, the Selkie, or the Norris. What will you get? I don't know. It doesn't really tell me anything. So if I click on the, actually, yeah, that's it. Understood. So great, that really doesn't do much for me. Thank you. Now on to on-ice play. Even then, the adaptability is not very high, but I'll talk about it anyways. So the on-ice play that you click for any player, but especially for rookies, that will allow you to talk about the player's scheme fit, play style, and position. However, they have to be adaptable enough, and that means young enough that they could change it. If you ask a 30-whatever-year-old Sidney Crosby to change his play style, he's going to say, listen, I'm not changing my play style. It's worked for me my whole career. No need to do anything. If I'm talking to Brand Clark here, I say, let's go over your scheme fit. It's going to be very risky. Right now, Brand Clark has certain scheme fits, such as whether he's pinching, whether he's blocking, whether he's high energy or low energy in the lines, which we'll talk about a little bit later. He has all of those fits to him. I tried to talk to him about it. I appreciate the feedback, but I believe sticking with my current game is best for now. So, okay, sorry, Brand Clark, we won't talk about that anymore. Now, for on-ice play, I might say, hey, listen, Brand Clark, you're an offensive defenseman. I have a 50-50 chance here of trying to convince you to think about being maybe a two-way D, a defensive D. No, your guidance is valued. I don't want to hear it. Sorry, Brent. And one last thing I can try to talk to you about would be your position. I want to move you fully from a defenseman to being a forward. How about that? Could we do it? Very convincing to change position, but the game is only offering me to change him to like a left defenseman here. So if I say, hey, let's change your position, very convincing. Don't tell me I'm playing forward. Okay, now I could choose the positions. Good. So if I say, hey, you're a left defenseman, I want you to also play right defenseman. I want you to be a right defenseman. It would be risky. If I want him to be a left wing, a right wing, or a center, it's actually just as risky. So I don't really get that moving to the right side on the blue line is as risky as asking him to be a centerman. But let's say if I ask him to be a centerman, what happens here? No, it didn't work out. Sadly, trust me, I'm better off staying in my current position. Too bad. So that could work, though. It just said it was risky, not very risky. So sadly, you didn't see any players agree, but that's the conversation that has to be had if you want to do that. Any other like really young players here? Like not really here in Los Angeles. What about Jordan Spence? Jordan Spence, we talk about on-ice play for you. Adaptability, again, not very high. If I talk about, it's 50-50 for play style. Can we move your play style? Okay, good. I want to make you into a two-way defenseman. The higher player's overall rating and census attributes will factor into the player's willingness to change. So he'd be 50-50 in changing to a two-way defenseman, and also 50-50 into becoming a defensive defenseman. Interesting. So let's say I want to turn you into a two-way D. Jordan Spence, you say, great, I think that's a great idea. With my ability to anticipate plays, I'm sure I can work on becoming a solid two-way defenseman. So if he agrees, now here come the promises. I believe you can make this change quickly. Let's aim for a 1-month timeline. Let's aim for a 2-month timeline. So what determines the success of the player? That seems to also be kind of in the air. So I'm going to give him his ice time. I'm going to hope that he has success, but I can't really do that much more to hope that it sticks, that he becomes a two-way D-man. So I don't really understand the difference between 1 month or 2 months, because either way, you're kind of just crossing your fingers. So whatever, let's say it's a 2-month promise, and let's see how it works out. Great. Yeah, that's, again, it's cool. Some of the things like in franchise mode, they're cool, they're fun, but what is it really leading towards? If the goal was for him to have a certain plus minus, or if I changed him to an offensive defenseman, score a certain number of points within that month or 2 months, then I would understand. But just say, hey, let's give it a 1-month trial and see how it works. Basically comes down to in a month or in 2 months, they'll say, yes, I love it, or no, I don't like it. So it just comes down to how the player feels, not anything that you can actually do about it. So now that the season goal conversation has been had with that player, you don't need to set a goal every season, but if you do, you can go through your entire lineup. After the preseason, this will no longer be here, so the season goal has to be set before the regular season begins. Once the goal has been set, or once the preseason has ended, you can then go talk to the player about any topic that you like at any moment that you like. So you go to the conversation tab and you can talk about the on-ice play again, so adaptability, position, play style, or the clause option to talk about waiving their clause to fully waive it or just talk about waiving it to a couple teams. And instead of having to do that through the trade screen, you can do it through the conversation screen. So there's not really much reason to talk to a player unless you really think that things aren't working out and they're adaptable enough that you want to change them. I don't see the conversations as that necessary during the season itself. Again, if I want to just have a player waive their trade clause, I can do it in the trade screen. But hey, the conversation tab is here for you at any moment that you like. So those are preseason conversations that include season goals, regular conversations that include possibilities of adaptability, play style, position, etc. There are also off-season conversations with players. So sadly, I need to sim to the end of the season to get there, but let's just jump ahead so I can give you an idea of how off-season conversations look. Oh, and here we go. As I've been simulating, Jordan Spence comes to me in 2 months and says, hey, despite my best efforts, I don't think I've become a true two-way defenseman. It's just not for me. Sorry, GM guide. And you say, we can actually chat about this topic at a later time, I want to discuss something else, or just, hey, thanks, that's it. So it just seems pretty random whether it works or it doesn't work, and that's about it. You can always try again, but as the player gets older, the adaptability goes down. I'd rather just change the player's playstyle before the franchise mode save begins and go like that. But it's, I like the feature, just doesn't always work out. Okay, so the season has come to an end and the LA Kings did not make the playoffs. So sad. We go over to the conversation tab now once we exit out, and we see off-season focus. There's also conversations for injuries. So let's say, Phil Donnell, right now you're injured. Buddy, how you doing, Phil? Came for a little house visit, brought some flowers. Thanks for checking up on me. Hey, you got it, Phil. Some flowers, some chocolates. Hope you're feeling better. Let's discuss your current injury. Well, I don't know what there really is much to discuss about it, unless I have some sort of super soldier serum for him. Let's see. Doc says there's a chance I could play at some point in the next 7 days, but it's a playoff time. I'm ready to go now. I'm not worried about an injured arm. Okay, this is interesting. So actually, it does have, I take back my jokes. It could actually do something here. So you can essentially tell him, hey, let's play through the injury. Let's rest an extra week on top of what the injury date was, or let's just heal naturally what I was already doing. Hey, it's a free +10 to management morale. So you know what? If you need someone to get a little boost in morale because they're low and they're injured, just go and say, hey, heal naturally. That's what I was already going to do anyways. Now I get a free +10. If you say rest an extra week, I don't think there's any value in doing that. Once they're fully healed, they're fully healed. And play injured, it's risky. Maybe in playoff time you can talk to the player about that. But yeah, so I'd say, hey, let's play. It's risky. What does he say? No, you're right. I should rest up. But we'll let you make the... But I said... Okay, whatever. Okay, so it says to play, but then the conversation says you make the decision. So I don't really understand the difference there. You're right. I should rest up. Okay, so it could be... Okay, so I guess that's what it is. Now, I'm piecing it together as I talk through it, literally here. You give them the call, and it's risky for what he'll say. If he says rest, then you won't be able to bring him back sooner than you would have hoped to. So I probably would just let it wait until it becomes a playable injury and then play him if I need him to. Unless it's really like game 7 and it's now or never, and I don't mind if it says that he's going to rest, I might as well take the risk. I guess that's the only time that you would think about using it. Now, also that the postseason is over, whenever you're eliminated, you can talk about the off-season focus with a player. Let's go to Adrian Kempe. I haven't talked to him yet in this guide. Adrian, how are you, big boy? No doubt, ready for our sit-down. What's our next move? A little end-of-season debrief, let's call it. So, as always, you can talk about the on-ice play, the clause option, blah, blah, blah. But your additional option here in the off-season is to talk about the off-season focus. Now, Adrian, I want you to focus on your offensive game, defensive game, or adaptability. If a player is not adaptable enough and you want them to become more adaptable because once the preseason gets started, you're planning on talking to him about his playstyle or his scheme fit, try and prime him with an adaptability focus. Like, pretty much you're telling him, start getting ready for me to talk to you in 2 months. That's what the adaptability focus is. And aside from that, there's offensive and defensive sides of the game that you could talk about. If you want it to be the offense, you can say, listen, I want you to work on your skating, shooting, to shoot more, pass more, skill training, awareness, or go back to the defensive side. So if I say work on your skating, it's a possible +2 to the skating attributes. It's either yes or it's no, that it's a +2. Either it doesn't happen or it's a +2 to all the skating attributes. Same for the shooting, either it's a yes or a no, that's a +2 to all the shooting powers and accuracies. Shoot more, every player has the pass shoot slider. So if you have a sniper who's only scored 15 or 20 goals and you want them to shoot more, this is what you have them do. It's exactly what I did in my Islanders franchise mode. Bo Horvat had back-to-back seasons of 20 goals. After 2 off seasons of telling him to shoot more, he finally shot more and scored 40 goals. Part of that is line mates, part of that is growth, whatever, but the shoot more slider in the off-season goal will very much help you. If you have a playmaker who's scoring too many goals, not passing enough, whatever it might be, tell him to pass more. It will increase pass frequency. Skill training, +2 or no +2 to all puck skill attributes, +1 to offensive awareness, and +2 to discipline if you talk about awareness. Or you can go over to the defensive side of things in the goals, and you can say, hey, let's focus on your defensive IQ, so defensive awareness and discipline. Physicality, all the physical attributes. Two-way play, so shot blocking and stick checking, or again, go back to offense. So there's no reason to not do these unless you want to hold yourself in check. Maybe it's a little too cheese for you. It's easy to, if you give a goal to every player for multiple seasons, it's definitely easy to see growth after a few years. Don't get me wrong. I try and limit myself to maybe 3 to 5 conversations per off season for things that I see like really need to be fixed. Snipers need to shoot more, passers who have terrible puck skills. Those are things I try and focus on. For my guys who are already stars, I don't usually give them off-season focuses, but it's totally up to you, and this is the time to do it. It's not always a guarantee, but there's no negative if they don't get it. It's either stay stagnant or a +2 or a +1, whatever the goal set was going to be. So off-season focuses, that's the last part of the conversations, one of the new additions to NHL 25. Now we'll throw it back to NHL 24. Now we're done with coaches and player conversations. Let's get back over to what I was talking about, and that was scouting. So if I press R1, it brings me over to the scouts in the assigned staff screen. You can also back out and go and click on assigned scouts. So I can go to coaching staff and click on R1, or I can just go directly to the scouts by clicking on the assigned scouts screen. Same thing at assigned scouts screen, I can click L1 and it brings me to the coaches. So there you have it. For the scouts, I will not say very much because I'm going to direct you to another video of mine, the complete guide to everything scouting and drafting on NHL 23, 24, even NHL 22. That's a video that I've made. It's going to be here in the top right corner in the cards. If there's ever a video that I recommend watching, it is that one. By following the method that I use for scouting, you will have at least the top 200 prospects fully scouted every draft. And part of that is making sure that you fix your scouts, and that's in that video. So I won't get into it in this video, but I'll just say, when it comes to your scouting, if you're using my settings where you don't use any pro scouts, you could fire your pro scouts right away and go hire amateur scouts. Or before doing that, you could look at if a pro scout has a good amateur scout rating. So if I go and look at where he can scout well by clicking R3 to open up his card, I see, oh, this scout also has an A rating in the USA East. So I could send him there before firing him. This scout is good, A+ in the USA West. I could send him there. So I could do that before firing him. So keep those things in mind. Before you go and fire all your pro scouts, you might want to look at which pro scout could be useful elsewhere. Once you do, let's say you fire 4 of them, you're at 17, you're down to 13 on 20. Now you have to go out and hire 7 more scouts. So you click on the options button, it brings you to the hire staff screen, and here you go. Again, that's a separate screen that you could get through directly through assigned scout, or you could go over to the manage contract screen and click on hire staff. That brings you to the possibility of hiring coaches or the possibility of hiring scouts. I usually sort by overall and then scroll through each one looking, okay, I'm trying to see which one is good in the NLA. B, B-, C-. A-rated, I'm gonna go ahead and hire this person. So you do that, you fill in the spots that you need. I explain in that video how many scouts you want to have in each region and then what to do for their scouting assignments. So it's a long video, but it is definitely worth it. I'll leave it there. I'm not gonna get into it in this video because it's a long process. This video is already so long. I can see it as I'm recording before I've even edited it. It's going to be such a long video, but I'm hoping that it's helpful for you as I'm really diving in deep and describing every single element here. So that's all about the scouting and the coaching staff. Once you are scouting, if you want to go and look at the view draft class, this will give you a little bit of an idea of who's going where according to central scouting. We'll get into this when it gets to the draft later on towards the end of this guide, but you can always at any time in the year look at where players are ranked according to central scouting. You can sort by league, sort by player, and even you can sort by potential once that starts to become uncovered. The little star next to a player's name gives you an idea of the range that you're drafting in. So if you're at the bottom of the league, your star will be up here. If you're at the top of the league, your star will be around 30. So it tells you all about that. Some real players, some not. If you want to know who's real and who isn't, most Europeans are not real. In the first few years, WHL, OHL, QMJHL, the majority are real. USA West, USA Central, USA East, and Russia never have any real players. Those are always generated. So oftentimes the better gems come from there. There's no real world player who's ranked 400 in the WHL that EA decided to give elite potential to. That just hasn't happened. But there might be a generated player that has that potential. So keep that in mind when it comes to who's real and who isn't. If they don't have a picture, and if they're 17, and if they're European, chances are they could be a generated player. But feel free to give it a quick Google search if you're within the first few years of the franchise mode. But after like 2026, everybody's generated. Another thing that you can look at, which you can't see now because no one's been scouted yet, but once a player has been scouted and once the season has gone on, number one, you can see their point totals and the strength of competition of their league. For example, this is a C- league. So if a player gets 100 points in a C- league, that's very different than if a player gets like 40 points in 40 games in an A+ plus league. You can see their player style, their scout rank, and you'll also see more in the report on their strengths, their weaknesses, their NHL ETA, when are they going to be able to become an NHL player, how many years away are they from joining the squad. Those are things that we'll see at the draft later on. So that's the draft class. You can also look at the draft board. This is very helpful before you go into the draft because you can see where are you projected to pick. If I have pick number 1 at, let's say, 17, pick number 2 from the Avalanche is 37, pick number 3 from the Wild is 94, you'll be able to have an idea of, okay, that is where the pick is. Now let me look at the scout recommendations, or even go back to the draft class and scroll down to 94 or whatever and see who could be players that I'm potentially targeting. Is there a guy I really want at 88? Will I have to trade up? So keep that in mind. Checking the draft board is very valuable before the draft starts. And you also look, what are my strengths and weaknesses, my forward depth chart, my defensive depth chart, my goalie depth chart, E overall for everything, great. So good things to keep into consideration, especially when it comes to the off season. The last thing in this little trade and improve window would be the player search. Very valuable to use the player search when you're looking for something in particular, especially. If I'm looking for, okay, my team's great, but I'm really struggling, I need a top 4 defenseman. You go and look, okay, defense. Then their role. Do I want a top 2 defenseman, top 4 defenseman? Let's say I need a top 2 defenseman, and I need them to be, let's say I want a two-way defenseman who is right-handed. I need them to be, let's say, at least 25, so that I'm not getting any prospects in here. I want a guy who's good to go right now, who's going to help me today. My max on salary is I can't pay him more than, let's say, 9 million, and I want him to be signed for at least 2 years with an overall of at least 86. Let's do that. And go ahead and search, and I get 9 results. I put all my little restrictions, looking for scholarly articles, and there you go. Here are all my possibilities, assorting according to whatever you want, potential, trade value, overall, whatever it is. So there you have it. Very, very useful when you're looking for specific prospects or positions, or just one sort of player to fill a hole in your lineup. This is so useful. If you also watch list any players, so for example, if I go back to here, let's say I'm really interested in Aaron Ekblad, I go ahead and pin him to my watch list. Where is my watch list? It's in player search. So I click on player search and I scroll down to watch listed. It'll give me all of my watch listed players. I can have up to 25 players watch listed at a time, and they stay on my watch list until I remove them, even if I go ahead and trade for them. So the player search, a super valuable tool and one that is very important to use. So this little window's all done. Now we can move over to manage roster. The most important thing on manage roster, and one of the most important parts of franchise mode itself, is editing your lines. Not only just making changes throughout the year, but also giving yourself the best possibility to succeed with players getting good ice time and good chemistry. So when I go ahead and enter the edit line screen, as you saw, it asked me, do I want my assistant coach to be on or off? I keep him turned off. I can go ahead and change a few things. First and foremost, I want to have a lineup that gives me good chemistry. In the past, chemistry used to be decided exclusively due to line fit and player types. I used to put out videos, NHL 21, NHL 22, how to maximize your chemistry, but in recent history, it's become almost exclusively due to X factors. So right now, playmaker and sniper is a great combination, but with a two-way forward, this used to kill the chemistry. You could not get a +5, or it would be almost impossible to get a +5 with having a two-way forward on a line with a playmaker and a sniper. But because Caulfield has 2 check marks, and Suzuki has 3 check marks, and Pearson has 4 check marks, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have a +9 as my line score. That's not enough in the past to get a +5. What really gets me that +5 are the X factors. Suzuki has 3 and Caulfield has 3. Now you might be asking, which X factors give you the boosts? Which ones are best for your players? Honestly, I could not tell you exactly. I like to have X factors that go according to the player. Caulfield's a sniper, so he has 1T, make it snappy, and snipe. But it doesn't necessarily have to be those. If I took those 3 off and I gave him ones like for defensive stick and for face-offs and for stuff like that that don't have to do with being a sniper, he would still have the chemistry boost. So Caulfield, Suzuki, and Pearson get the +5. And honestly, because of Suzuki and Caulfield's line fit and X factors, I can put anyone on this first line with them, regardless of their line fit and regardless of their player type, and they would get a +5 with them. So keep that in mind. The X factors and the line fits for just a couple guys could be enough to negate whatever the third player's fit and X factors are or aren't. So +5 on that first line. If I want a +5 on my second line, I could do a few things like Newhook could come up here. Even though he doesn't have X factors and the player types aren't too special here with a two-way forward, I get a +1, mostly just because of the line fit. And if I were to add X factors to one or more of these players, this +1 line would become a +3 or a +5. And there you have it. So +5 on the first line and 1s throughout the rest of the lineup, because this is a good coach with good line fits. As I look at most players and their scheme fit on the right, I don't really see anyone who has a horrible fit anywhere. Most players fit quite well in this lineup. You'll often see players who fit very well on maybe 3 out of 4 lines, but one line is horrible. Like Caulfield, not a great fit on the 4th line. If I put him down there, still the +1 because of the X factors, despite the X's in his line fit. So always good to keep in mind that line fit does have its place, but it really comes down to the X factors when it comes to going from a +1 to a +5. That's why I don't really care too much about acquiring players that have a great line fit, because if the other 1 or 2 players on that line have good fits and or X factors, it negates it. So that's why I don't place as much importance on pro scouting as I used to. On defense, we see 0 +1 0. It used to be if you put any offensive defenseman with a defensive defenseman, you're set, but no longer the case always necessarily. Like no one here has the most ideal chemistry. Like I could go +2 +1 0. That's the best I could do. A lot of dashes in this lineup. So not the end of the world, but just to say with no X factors, this is pretty good chemistry. Usually you're in a lot worse of a situation. You're usually much worse off. And your goaltenders here as well. So in your lineup, one other thing you can do is, as you can see on the right side, you can click triangle for edit strategies. Now, every coach has their own strategy. Offensive line 1, how much are they going to carry and dump? How much are they going to cycle and shoot? Stuff like that. It says edit strategies, but you can't actually edit strategies. It's more like view strategies. I don't know why it says edit. You can only view. You can change the starting line. Like you could have your second line start the game if you want, but you can't actually edit the strategies. If you go into the game itself and play it or watch it, you can pause the game and go over to the lines and you can edit it in the game. But just in the franchise mode, outside of the game itself, that one game, you cannot edit any strategies, which I find pretty weird. The one place where you can make some edits would be on the special teams. On the special teams, you can't change the power play formation, but you could change the face-off formation as well, and you can't even change the anything else. Yeah, look at all the stuff you can't change. But you could change the roles. The roles are important. Who's the distributor means who's going to be doing a lot of the passing, who's the power play quarterback, who's the finisher, who's going to be the guy looking to take that shot, and the puck carrier, who's going to be looking to gain the offensive zone, and as it says at the bottom there, distribute the puck, carry the puck into the zone, dump if there isn't enough space. So usually you have your best shooter as the finisher, like Caulfield. Your distributor might be your quarterback at the point, like maybe Matheson, and your puck carrier would probably be the guy with the most size who's hardest to knock off the puck, maybe Sean Monahan on this unit. I like to make sure that you also have players on their off sides, like especially your finisher. Make sure Caulfield as a right shot is on the left side if he is going to be looking to take that shot. So that's the one thing to look on the power play. And you can also go on the penalty kill. But here you can only look at the face-off formation. You can't actually do anything else. And here as well, there's also chemistry. This is where it comes down to line fit and player types more than anything. If I just put snipers and playmakers, it might not be as beneficial for chemistry as putting two-way forwards. Monahan and Evans are both two-way forwards, which is great, but they both have X's for the line fits. If they were snipers with 2 X's, it would have negative chemistry, but because they're two-way forwards with 2 X's, it has a 0 for chemistry. So player type does have its place in special teams, but 5-on-5, not as much. So you can play around with your lines and do all kinds of stuff, but at the end of the day, you could always just press L3 and go ahead and click on head coach preferred lines, and they just do whatever they want. If you don't really care too much, you can just let them take care of the lines when there's injuries or whatever else, and they can just take care of making changes when those are necessary. You can also click on options and go down to the AHL and make the line changes there. And also keep in mind, you can do everything else here. Penalty kill, 3-on-3 penalty kill. You can go to the extra lines. You can look at shootout, the 3-on-3 overtime, extra attacker. You can be in control of all of that. A couple more things that I'll say about lines just as tips. When you're making quick changes, as you may have seen me doing, if you press square on PlayStation, you can just do quick swaps like this by pressing square on each player. You can also click R1 for quick subs for players who are scratched. I want to swap Pearson with Pizzetta. I can just make a quick swap right there. Pizzetta is now in my lineup, and now in my scratches, Pearson is scratched. Without me going and clicking on OK, scratch this player, sorry, scratch player, are you sure? Yes. Who do I want to put in? Tanner Pearson. Do I want to substitute in the line, in all lines? There you go. So using that quick sub is valuable. Another thing I'll add in terms of my tips when it comes to the extra lines, in the shootout, what I like to do is put my shootout lineup according to shooting accuracy. So Caulfield would shoot first 91, 93 on his slap and wrist shot accuracies, as you can see on the right. Then 88, 90, 87, 87, 86, 86, 85, 86. Newhook shoots last. But if I had a player who had better shooting accuracies than 85 and 86, if I had another 87, 87 in my lineup, I would take out Newhook and put that player. As in my experience, when it comes to the shootout, it's all about the shooting accuracies. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like left to right. Caulfield, Suzuki, Doc, Monahan, Newhook for shooters 1 to 5. And finally, if I want to add or remove X factors to players on my own team or players on other teams because I want to affect line chemistry either positively or negatively, or I just want it to be more realistic, like, hey, this guy is 90 shooting, shouldn't he have an X factor? I can go ahead to the League tab and click on Edit Player, and then click on the player that I want and go ahead and scroll down to the X factors. Players will gain or lose X factors over time according to their overall and attributes. So I could go in right now and give Suzuki a gold zone ability and add in a couple of extra superstar abilities. You can have a maximum of 6 with 5 superstars and 1 zone. But if I don't do that, it's also not the end of the world because the game will get it to him eventually. If he develops well, he becomes a 90 plus overall, he has super high attributes, he will develop it on his own. That's new and exclusive to NHL 24, as in previous games, no matter how good or how bad a player got, they always had their same X factors. So now a player's X factors can progress or regress. Scrolling down, you can also look at view lines. You can't see the chemistry on other teams in the NHL, but you can see their lineups. This is always fun for when you're going into a postseason matchup. You want to see how your team compares to the team that you're going up against, so you can check out all of their same things that you can look, power play, penalty kill, and all of that, and you can scroll through all the teams in the NHL, or you could swap to the AHL and do the same thing for the American Hockey League. Now, roster moves. You can go ahead and click on roster moves from here, or when you're in edit lines, you can click on L3 and go directly there if you're in the middle of making line changes. You can click go to roster moves. At roster moves, here's where you can send players up or down from the NHL to the AHL. In the preseason, there are no waivers, so you can send down anyone you want, call up anyone you want, no problem. But during the actual season, you got to be very careful of this right here, waiver eligible. If a player is waiver eligible, that means they cannot be sent down without every other team in the NHL getting the opportunity to claim them for free. So you would only want to send a waiver eligible player from the NHL down to the AHL during the season if you're confident that they won't be claimed. Either their contract is super expensive, like they're an 80 overall making $6 million, or they're a low overall player like 77 and you think they'll make it under the radar. But if a player is like a normal average player, a guy making 2, 3, 4, 5 million, and he's like a mid 80 overall guy, the chances of him getting claimed are very high, so be very careful with that. You'll want to set your lineup before the waivers kick in at the beginning of the season, so do that in the preseason. So for example, Caulfield is not waiver eligible yet. It's not because he has a one-way contract, it has to do with the service time in the National Hockey League. So if he's not waiver eligible yet, I can call him up or send him down whenever I want, no matter what. But also be careful, if morale is turned on, that will affect their morale either positively or negatively for being called up or sent down respectively. Additionally, there are restrictions from the salary cap and the roster size. I can have 21 skaters, 2 goalies. I can't go over the salary cap. If I want to choose multiple players, multi-select would be clicking square. So select, see, just a bunch of guys who don't have waivers, 1, 2, 3. I could send down Caulfield, Gooley, and Harris, and then call up, let's say, Lindstrom, Armia, and Farrell. Farrell I can send back down whenever I want, but Lindstrom and Armia would have to go through waivers. Lindstrom would likely get claimed, while Armia likely would not. So keep that in mind. Very helpful, especially when you have injuries going on. Roster moves are somewhere that you will often be. To keep yourself from having to make too many roster moves and risk waivers too often, it's good to keep players up in the NHL who are just healthy scratches, who you're not using. If you need 12 forwards, 6 defensemen, and 1 goalie, it's not a bad idea to have an extra 13th forward, an extra 7th D, and even an extra 3rd goalie. But you could do it differently. You could have a couple defensemen and 1 forward, a couple forwards and 1 defenseman, no goalie. Play it how you like, but just keep in mind, having healthy scratches, even though they won't get ice time, it's a good idea to have them available so that you're not always doing call-ups and having to fix your AHL lines and who's on waivers and whatnot. It's a good idea to just have people ready if needed. One last thing that I want to mention for roster moves, as this was a major question that I got in the NHL 23 guide. Many people want to know, how do I call up my prospects who are in the WHL, the OHL, the QMJHL? And the answer is, you need to call them up before the beginning of the season. So Owen Beck, Mashar, Mishak, all these guys in the Canadian system, I need to call them up to the NHL system before the regular season starts. Once I call those players up, they'll be with me in the NHL. But if I send them down after the start of the season, or if they didn't start the season with my team, they will be in the juniors for the entirety of that season. So if I send them down, they don't go to the AHL, they get sent back to their junior team and they cannot be recalled from their junior team. So when it comes to major prospects, like last year, people were saying, how do I get Connor Bedard into the NHL? You got to make sure that he's on your team to start the season. If he's not, you will not be able to call him up, nor can you bring him back after sending him down. So be careful that your lineup is set how you want it to be set before starting the regular season. Also in Manage Roster, you have the injury report screen. If you want to check out how long a player is injured, you can't see it right now because no one's injured, but it would show you the player. It would tell you how long they're injured for, and it would also tell you how it's affecting their attributes. So if the player has, I don't know, let's say a broken wrist and he has a playable injury, it will say, keep in mind, his wrist shot accuracy is at -10. His shot power is at -10. So that's a good thing to check out if you're going to put a player in your lineup and you want to see what are their actual attributes. Is he back with 88 shooting accuracy? No, it's actually 78. So another reason why I never use a player for a playable injury. I always wait until they're fully healed, but that makes them unhappy. So again, as a result, I play with morale turned off. Going down to progress reports. Progress reports are very important, more towards the end of the season. Over the course of the year, whether a player be in the NHL, the AHL, the juniors, Europe, or what, they will be playing games and they will be hopefully growing in their attributes. So in the NHL, you can sort by modifications and you can look at, okay, they're deking, their hand-eye, whatever, natural growth, statistical growth, and morale growth. Morale growth is temporary. They're very happy because of what's going on and they're boosted up, but if they become unhappy and during the offseason when things go back to normal, it'll come back down to earth. The difference between natural growth and statistical growth, I'm going to be honest, in my experience is a bit of a mystery. Natural growth seems to be growth that happens due to just the course of life. He has high potential, he's getting older, he's getting ice time, therefore his skills are naturally growing. Statistical growth seems to be a bonus that comes from if they're doing exceptionally well. If they're doing something incredible like going over point per game, that's not just going to be growth because they're happy or growth because they're learning more, but also because they are having such good success. So it's kind of hard to navigate which one's which one sticks, which one's permanent, what's not, and temporary. But what I care about most is what a player's overall is to start a season. If a player ends with a lot of growth, but then they start the season lower, it doesn't really help me as much. So when I look at a player's overall, it's really at the beginning of a season. That tells me what their base overall is. And personally, just another reason to keep morale turned off. But beyond the NHL, you can also go and look at in the system. So you can see players who are playing in Europe, players who are in the AHL, who's growing, who's not, what's their overall, what's their age, what's their potential. Always good to keep all of that in mind as the GM. Players who are not growing enough, when's the time to cut them loose, players who are having really crazy growth. So it's good to check progress reports just to keep note on, are there any crazy players that are growing in my blind spot that I haven't given attention to? Just to quickly make sure that I'm not missing out on any potential players being in my lineup or being higher than they should be. Lastly, we have the captains and jerseys. Now be very careful with your captaincies, because let's say you start your franchise mode and you like Suzuki, you like Matheson, but you want Gallagher to get traded, let's say, so you take away his captaincy and you give it to Cole Caulfield, his alternate captaincy. That will make chemistry for that player, and possibly even for players who like Gallagher, to drop. So even though the season hasn't even started and you've never even made these decisions yet, just because the game gave it to those players and you want to change it to someone else, they will now lose morale. They'll be more upset. They'll maybe even have a conversation with you about, why did you strip that captaincy from me? So another reason why I don't like morale. But just to say, be careful if you have morale turned on when it comes to changing captaincies, because it will have an effect on the morale of those players and possibly the players who are highly connected to those players. So now we move on to the Manage Contracts tab, and the most important thing here would be View Contracts. I'm looking at the View Contracts screen throughout the year, just to keep account of my team, just to see where I'm going in the future. It's a very helpful place. So when you look at View Contracts, you'll see all of your current contracts as of this season, but you can also look into the future and what players' expiring status will be once their contract is up. Sean Monahan is on an expiring deal, and next year he will be an unrestricted free agent. He also does want an extension, which is good to keep in mind. If I scroll down, I would see some players are restricted free agents, RFAs, and some players don't want an extension. So it's good to have all that information in mind. I'll break down the difference between UFA and RFA in just a moment. But just to say, it gives you the contract value of each player. I like being able to see my cap space, my buyout penalties, how many contracts I have, how much retained salary I have. And of course, also, I like to use this screen as a way of counting at the start of the year or at the start of the offseason to say, where do I need to pick up some players in free agency or in the offseason? So if I count my forwards, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I might say, I don't like having so many low 80, mid 80 guys. Maybe I'll trade one of these or two of these guys who are 81 and get someone who's an 83 or an 84. It's good just to put everything into perspective. Then on defense, you can go and count here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't like having 79s, blah, 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 etc. Now I can also sort by, as I said, in the system that shows AHL and then any other European or junior league. And I can also sort by all expiring. All expiring shows me any player who is on the last year of their contract. From here, we can jump back to NHL 25 and start talking about contract negotiations, because that is something that's definitely new for franchise mode here in NHL 25. I decided to keep it in the playoffs where I left off in the last little jump into 25, because this is when you'll actually be using your contract negotiations the most. At the start of a franchise mode, you can look at making extensions and stuff like that, but at the end of year one or at the end of any season, you'll be thinking about, okay, who's about to become a free agent and who do I need to sign? So in your contract negotiations right here, you can look at a lot of different things. You can see your main roster of your players. You can look in the system, so guys who are in your AHL team, guys who you've drafted in the juniors. You look at guys who have a clause, and this is exclusively guys who have a clause. So, if you want to sort by that, that's another possibility. All expiring, who is about to become an unrestricted or restricted free agent. An unrestricted free agent means that if you leave them unsigned, they're going to be available for any team to sign for no problem on July 1st once free agency begins. If they are a restricted free agent, you can do something called qualifying, and if you qualify the free agent, they can still go to another team, but you will receive compensation back in the form of draft picks, depending on the threshold of how much that player was signed for, if they go to another team, something called an offer sheet. And you'll also be offered an opportunity to match that if they accept an offer from another team. So RFAs are very helpful in that way, but UFAs, you get nothing for them if they walk, and if you don't sign them by the deadline. So you can sort by UFAs, RFAs once the re-sign phase come. You can look at the unsigned prospects on your team, the guys that you have drafted but don't yet have a contract, guys who you've signed recently, and guys who want extensions. Now, want extension doesn't really mean much to me, because what matters more is their organizational interest. What do I mean by that? So that's a new thing in NHL 25. If I look at all expiring, in the past it used to be, hey, let me go talk to this guy, I'm going to offer him a contract extension, and I'm just going to offer him 85% of what he's looking for, and he's more often than not going to accept it. The 85% trick no longer works in franchise mode with this new new organizational interest bar system. So when it comes to, let's say, Gavrikov, he wants 2 years at $2.875 million with no clause. That, according to his team interest, makes his contract bar very interested. He really wants to sign this contract, and his organizational bar is almost at the max. He's very interested in re-signing here in Los Angeles. If the player's organizational bar is high enough, you can bring down the contract interest a little bit because they're so interested in signing with you. And it's also vice versa. If the organizational interest is too low, they don't want to come to your team, you can give them a super interesting and desirable contract, and they still most likely will not sign it because they're not interested in coming your way. So that being said, like Gavrikov at 1 year, he's really not interested in a 1 year contract. So let's say I really want to sign him for 1 year and I want to make him interested in 1 year. If I increase the money here, and let's say we go to 3.5 million, he'd be more interested in a 1 year contract. But let's say, okay, you really want 2 years? Fine, I'll do 2 years, but I'll make you pay for it. I don't want to give you 2.875. I want to give you 2.25. Then, okay, well, he's definitely not interested in that contract. What if I now add some clauses to that contract? If I give you a full no movement clause over the next 2 seasons, look how much that jumps the interest bar. 2 years at 2.25, still probably not enough to make him sign. I probably want to get somewhere like around with 2 bars left. Like around 7.5 to 8 bars on the contract scale is usually what I will offer a player who has a high enough organizational interest. Probably about 8 bars or higher. So if the organizational interest is 8 bars or higher, my general rule of thumb, definitely not a guarantee, my general rule of thumb is offer them 7.5 to 8 bars on contract or higher to make it work. If the organizational interest is too low, like let's say around 5 bars, then you got to offer like 10 out of 10 on the contract bar. So I digress. Let's say I'm offering, okay, $2.5 million at 2 years for a full no movement clause. Very interested in that. Now, your no movement clause could be reduced. Year 1, a no movement clause, but year 2, it's a no movement clause so that you can't be sent down, but a modified no trade clause that I can trade you to 16 teams. It's 75% trade protection for a 24 team. Yeah, so you can play around with that, or you can go for the no trade clause. Again, it could be reduced or it could be full. If it's full, then it's 2 years of the same thing. If it's reduced, then it's 1 year with one, 1 year with the other. And then if it's going to be a modified no trade clause, you can play with, again, full or reduced, and also with the percentages. So I can say, okay, it's a 4-team no trade list. Now, okay, 25 team more interested, 36% more interested, 50% more interested, all the way up to 90%. So just a 3-team trade list, all the way down to a 28-team trade list, depending on what you want to do here for a modified no trade clause. Again, it could be reduced, where it's something like 24 in year 1, 20 in year 2. Play around with it, absolutely. Build your own storylines. See what the player is interested in. No move plus no trade, or there's just no clause at all. So that's for players who are already on your team. You can play around with it because if they decline your offer, you can always just try again the next day. Give yourself a good buffer before July 1st, and you can play around with it. If it's an RFA, it's a little bit different because you can qualify them. You don't need to come to a conclusion by July 1st. Worst case, if things aren't working out, you just qualify and you figure out later on. So the biggest takeaway here is that the 85% trick no longer works, and I can most certainly and absolutely should play around with clauses and contract demands, organizational interest to try and get myself a better deal when it comes to contract negotiations. Okay, so perfect example here. We're in the re-sign phase. The draft is complete. Free agency is coming up on July 1st. I go to re-sign players. I look at all expiring. Again, you can do UFA or RFA, but if I look at all expiring and I say, Gavrikov, before you were very interested, but now, for some reason, your organizational interest is very low. Even if I give him a contract that he really wants at $2.7 million for 2 years, he just does not have much interest in re-signing in Los Angeles. This is where you can press triangle while you're in the screen, or you can click on him originally and press enter negotiation and try and raise his organizational interest. Listen, free agency is almost upon us, blah, blah, blah. And in this screen, I can talk about the contract that I'm willing to offer him, or I can even try and charm him to raise the organizational interest in being here in Los Angeles. We can even discuss a 2-way contract, stuff like that. But let's say I want to charm. It's risky, but let's try to charm him. Okay, yes, it's great to hear he's interested in being charmed. Now, if he said yes, no reason to click on contract, then you want to go to organization next and get into the charming. You can talk about the market size, you can talk about the team status, try and, roll the dice and see what happens. Being part of a large market, blah, 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 small market is where I see myself. Okay, well, I can try and persuade him, which is 50-50, or I can go back and talk about something else. So it's 50-50, basically just a coin toss. Here we go, cross your fingers, persuade, and he's not interested. I appreciate the perspective you're offering, but my current preference still stands out, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's go back to organization now. Let's talk about team status. You're joining a champion here. All right, again, 50-50 chance. You get two 50-50 chances in persuading him, and not interested. Not only has he not been interested here, but his organizational interest has gotten even lower. So no matter what I do here, can I even exit? No. Now I got to talk about his contract, 2 years, blah, blah, blah. Okay, end conversation. No matter what you do there, now that the organizational interest is at this point, no matter what I do, it is probably impossible to get him to sign. I've seen examples of where you give a player 15 million. If the interest is this low for the organization, there is, I'd say, a 0.01% chance that this player will ever sign with you no matter what you offer them. It could happen. I don't know what the exact circumstances would be. Different patches provide different things. Maybe that's changed. But from what I've seen in franchise mode, a player with that little interest getting 15 million will still say no. So now let's say I go to a player who I have better success with. Let's cross our fingers for somebody else. I don't get it. Gavrikov says yes for an extension, but he doesn't want it. And then Jeannot says yes, and I click on, says no, and I click on him, and he has tons of interest in re-signing. So I don't get what the threshold is here. What's the difference? What does it all mean? Everyone's very interested. Yeah, non-high-end players just won't ever not be that interested. So let's say, forget it. I do whatever I do here in the re-sign phase, and I'm going to go to free agency. That'll be maybe a bit of a better example for you in free agency. In free agency now in franchise mode, NHL 25, the added element to it all is seeing what that player's interest level is with your organization, and possibly even speaking to them about what their interest in other teams is. So if I say, okay, I can't just go out here and sign anybody that I want. If I'm sorting by... a good way, a little trick for you here. If you have Fog of War on and you don't know what the player overalls are, like, oh, is Granlund really a 91 overall? Sorting by the salary that they're expecting is a good way to see who the highest overall players are. Be careful, be mindful that it might just be an inflated contract ask because of they had a very good season, and vice versa, could be a much lower ask than their overall would suggest because they had a lower offensive season. But if you know nothing about the overalls, let's say I had question marks everywhere, this would be a good alternative to sort by who's who in the National Hockey League. So let's say I really wanted Mikael Granlund. He has no interest almost in signing with my team. If I go to him, I would not even try to offer him a contract before I go into the negotiation. Essentially, again, it's 50-50 to try and charm him. If he says yes, then his interest will skyrocket. If not, oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing, and now I messed it up. Okay, my bad. You see, never click on contract before you're ready. Let's try with Ivan Provorov. I learned my lesson there. Hopefully you did as well. I try to charm Ivan Provorov, and I want to inquire maybe. I could say, I understand you may have other offers on the table. Could you tell me more about them? So that's also risky. They could say yes or no. And yeah, look at this. That's rare. In the interest of getting the best offer possible, I can tell you I'm considering a 5 by 7.75 contract from Pittsburgh. Huh. Now, your organizational interest is not high enough for me to beat that with like a 5 by 7, let's say. So I would say, okay, let's try and talk about the market, the team status, let's persuade. Risky again, let's persuade him. Come on, Ivan Provorov, not interested. Okay, back to organization. I'm hurting the interest right now, sadly. Let's try to persuade him again. Risky. And this time success. Okay, so you see it skyrockets up like 5 little ticks on that thing. And now he's very convinced. Okay, if I press persuade, it says convincing. So let's convince him here. And there you go. You've put things into perspective for me. Okay, I'm interested. Cool. So now listen, I know you're being offered a 5 by 7.75. How about I offer you wanted 5 by 6.2. So I'll improve the offer a little bit. Actually, he's very interested in it. I don't need to offer him any clauses. So yeah, let's continue. I'm willing to give you 5 by 6.2. I'm locked into the number that I've decided in the negotiation. I can't change anything here. At this screen, all I can do is click offer contract, and that's what I did right there. I'll get back to you in a few days. If he had full organizational interest and full contract interest, he might sign with you, bang, right there and then, and say, I agree, thank you for the offer. You might not have to wait a few days. If the player is not 100% interested, then you'll see, okay, I'll get back to you in 3 or 4 days. That's because he had 5 teams, including us, 5 teams interested. If I go to a team like, let's say, Eric Johnson. He's very interested in signing with us. A player like Eric Johnson, I should say. He's very interested in signing with us, and there's no one else interested. So in theory, let's say I'm giving him, well, okay, actually he doesn't want 5 years. Let me give you 2 years, at 3 million, way above what you're looking for. With the organizational interest this high, he should sign that right now. Yes, I accept your offer, bang. So there's a little thing to keep in mind as well, which is new to franchise mode NHL 25. A high enough offer will get them to accept right there and then. So that's for the UFAs and the conversations that you can have. Now, you can also think about the RFAs. If you want to offer a contract to an RFA, restricted free agent, you will have to be willing to give up some compensation to that team if they decide to sign with you, and if the original team does not match the contract. So Evan Bouchard, let's say here, for example, I really want to sign Evan Bouchard, and he's not super interested, but I'm going to give him his 7 by 13.275 full no movement clause. Fantastic. Let's go even a little bit higher. Let's go 7 by 14. Whew. Edmonton, can you match this? If they cannot match it and they decide to let me have Evan Bouchard, it will cost me 4 years, my next 4 years of first round picks. Whew. Now that is a doozy. If you're wondering, well, what's the compensation? Can I play around with it a little bit? Absolutely. Scroll down to manage contracts, go to offer sheet compensation, and you'll see if the contract was 11.149 million or above, it's 4 years of first round picks. If I could talk with Evan Bouchard and get him down to wanting 11.1, instead of giving Edmonton 4 years of first, I'd have to give them my first, second, and third this year and my first next year. Much more manageable. So having a conversation with an RFA to bring him down below a certain compensation threshold would be very valuable. That's another plus to the conversations. So all the additions to franchise mode NHL 25, I like this one a lot. So it helps to make free agency feel more like free agency, not just let me throw a ton of money at you and hope that you sign with me. So that's free agency, UFAs and RFAs. Keep in mind that when you try to sign an RFA and you want to give up compensation, those picks have to be from your team. So if you have, let's say you need a first, a second, and a third, and in this draft you do have a first, a second, and a third, but your first and second are LA, if I'm the Kings, and your third is from Vancouver, you would need to reacquire your own third round pick before you can make that restricted free agent offer. You need to have your own draft picks for whatever compensation we're talking about. And also in free agency, while we're talking about it, you can also look at pending free agents. Pending free agents allow you to see who's slated to become a free agent next year, the year after, and even 2 years from now, so 3 years out. So 1 year away, 2 years away, 3 years away, depending if you're looking at the upcoming class and it's a week away, or if it's July 1st and you're looking at literally 365 days from now. But this allows you to try to get an idea of who might be expiring as a contract and who might you want to target trade-wise. If it's the week before the draft, and I know that free agency is 2 weeks away, I might want to look at this screen and say, who's about to go to free agency and who might I want to try trading for? If you trade for a player's rights, it's way cheaper to acquire them that way than if you're trying to trade for them under contract. If it's a star player like a McDavid, it's still going to be very, very difficult. But if it's like a good player, if I'm talking like, I don't know, let's say next season I really wanted to get the rights to Alex Tuck, he'd still be costly, but instead of him costing whatever, a first and 2 major prospects, it might only cost me a second now just to get his rights. Depends on what the team is thinking and what his age is by then, etc. So looking at the pending free agent screen is helpful to say, who might I want to target for a discounted price at the draft? It's not a guarantee that you'll get to keep them, but at least you'll have the negotiation advantage in the re-sign phase of getting to talk to them first for multiple days. While I'm here at the end of the season, I'm going to show you one other thing which has a new element in NHL 25. I have to go to Stats Central. I can click on it through the menu or click R3 on PlayStation 5. Click on the awards, and you can see the awards that were won in the season that was. The team awards as well as the individual awards in both the NHL and the AHL. Scrolling through those. Let's say I want to go see, I want Cutter Gauthier. He just won his first award. He won the 2025 Calder Trophy. In 5 years, as you can see on the left side, the history is no longer kept. So if I want to try and remember in the year 2040, did Cutter Gauthier win the Calder Memorial Trophy? I don't remember. Thankfully, I don't need to have a giant spreadsheet for that anymore, and the player's profile will tell me that. So if I go back to player search and I look for Cutter Gauthier, and I click on his player profile and scroll all the way down to awards, it will now show me he's won the Calder Memorial Trophy, last won in 2024-25. So it won't tell me the years that he's won every award, but it'll tell me the most recent year that he won the award, as well as how many times he has won it. So if we look at someone who has won a lot more awards, let's say like a Sidney Crosby, I'll see his award history and the year that he won the most recent one. So he's a 3-time Stanley Cup winner, 2 Conn Smythe, 2 Hearts, 3 blah, 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 etc., as well as the year that he won it most recently. I wish I could tell me the year that he won it, like all the years that he won it, but it's better than nothing, at least knowing how many he won and the year of the most recent one. So that ability to track awards is new to NHL 25, and we've been asking for it for a while, so I'm very glad to see it now included in franchise mode. Now let's continue going on to the next tab, which is the owner tab. I already spoke about the ownership settings and how I don't like it that much, but let's look a little bit over here. If you do have owner mode turned on, keep in mind the owner willingness to move, of course, is low, but the owner happiness is amazing, which is very good. That will keep you from getting fired. That's what you want to always be looking at. So your owner goals, you'll see, for example, they want, Jeff Molson is saying, I want 75% of the expected profit of 80 million. I want you to build a parking lot. I want you to upgrade the team store. I want you to get more club seats. And for each goal that you do, which takes weeks and hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars, even if I did every single one of these goals, what would I get over here? I would get 50, 40, 90, 130, $160,000. That gets me like one scout. Like, it's nothing. It's not worth my time, honestly. So those are the owner goals. You can propose relocation, but I'm not going to do that right now. So that's what you click if you want to actually say, hey, let's relocate. So those are the owner goals. To meet those owner goals, I can go to upgrade and start looking at, okay, concessions are at 81. Owner goal says to update the team store. So thank you, little banner says owner goal requirement. Parking lot 2, he says to go and purchase. Club seats, we're already at 99. But as always, those bathrooms are always atrocious. They always start terrible. For some reason, they're just always atrocious. So it's going to cost me $320,000 to do this. So it's crazy. It's going to cost me $320,000 just for the bathrooms. But if I do everything the owner asks through the whole season, I'm not even going to get $200,000 back. So it's, again, not worth my time. So you can go ahead and repair it. You have 2.633 million. I'd rather use that money for my scouts and for my coaches and not have to do these random things that don't really have any impact on my team's success or my player morale or whatever else. So those are things that they can be fun. I don't look down on anyone who likes to have that going. Just when I'm trying to do simulation and trades and lines, I find this gets in the way unnecessarily. You can go ahead and set prices as well for the upper bowl, the lower bowl. It will affect your profits. But again, on a team that's so successful as the Canadiens, does it really matter if they're making a few less dollars? Is he really going to fire you? I don't know, maybe he will. But game tickets, parking, merchandise, concessions, you can change all the prices on all these things. Fan feedback, are they happy, are they not happy? How much have you sold over the last few games? Nice to see, it's fun, it's immersive, but what are the stakes? The question, the main question, all comes back to the main question. Why am I doing this? Does it give me anything? It's just giving me a few $1,000s, which doesn't really get me anywhere. Team rankings for revenue generated, I can see for game tickets, concessions, merchandise, parking. Am I amongst the top teams generating revenue in these different areas over the last 7 days, 30 days, year to date, or all time? All time as in when you start your franchise mode. So always interesting, just, again, comes down to why am I doing it. Then we also have the budget, the marketing budget, the income statement, operations budget, promotions. So the marketing budget, general advertising, I can move it around with that slider. I can say, let's go less on general advertising. Let's go more on game ticket advertising. You can play around with that, season ticket advertising, all different things that you can do for the budget. Income statement tells you a little bit about how much has been spent and how much is in revenue. So what is your year-to-date profit? Operations budget. Do I need to allocate more to arena operations, promotions, like scout salaries? Even if I put it to the max, I have my max at, let's see, 4.185 million. Even if I move, I'd have to move everything to minimum, which would make people upset. And the owner would say, I'm not reaching the goals, but I'd have at least the best scouts. But then it gets fired, even though I'm drafting gems and building an elite dynasty. I'd be forsaking the advertising and the promotions. So yeah, I've said it enough. You get the point I'm trying to make. And finally, promotions. These are fun because if you go in-game, you can set promotions. So if I set this game as a promotion night, it's Nick Suzuki bobblehead night. When I go into that game, I'll see a Nick Suzuki bobblehead. It's fun. It's nice to do that. So setting the promotions can be fun, and you can auto-assign them or you can do them yourself at the beginning of the season. Those are all the different ownership-related things you can do if you have owner mode turned on. From here, we can now go to the League tab. At the League tab, you have the activity feed, where during the season, you'll have messages rolling, little pieces of information about players who scored a lot of points or trades that happened. You have the edit player spot here, where you can add or remove X factors, as we saw earlier. You can also go to your settings and change some of the things, whatever, turning injuries on or off or playing with the sliders. You can save your file. But of course, one of the major things to look at here would be the record book. In the record book, you can go to any team in the NHL. Let's say we're going to the Montreal Canadiens, and you can look at career records, single season records, rookie records, or single game records. Always very fun to look at that. Unfortunately, it is glitched. I've noticed a lot of glitches over the last couple of years, and even in NHL 24. For example, in my Vancouver Canucks franchise, it said at one point at the end of my first season that Thatcher Demko had 100 wins, but then I went into his stats and said he had 116 wins. So the record book was missing 16 wins. So the record book has been glitched for a couple games. I think it's been fixed mostly, but there's still some mistakes that I catch. So for the most part, it's good, but it's still frustrating to find some mistakes. If you don't want to look at just single franchise records, you can also look at NHL records, games played for, and this is always gets glitched over time. You'll have goalies playing 1,500 games by the end, just a glitch there as well. But you can see goals, points, assists, wins, all that over the course of a season, over the course of a career, or just for rookie records as well. So going back to the start of the season now, just to show you how simulation works, if I were to say I want to sim the entirety of the season, I can go from game 1 in October to game 82 in April. I can sim through the entirety of the season, and through the year, as things are simulating, stuff will happen, obviously. Injuries will happen, there will be morale changes to individual players, to the locker room, and I did turn injuries down a little bit because it was just I was trying to do this simulation, I was stopping every 2 seconds. So I want to show you, yes, the reality of franchise mode, but I also don't want to sit here for literally 15 minutes to sim this. Multiple morales going up because of ice time, multiple morales again because of ice time, great, everybody's happy. Players recovering from injuries, morale goes up, more ice time, everything's happy. When you acquire a new player, they're going to be upset or anxious, they lose morale if they get injured, which is unfortunate because it's not your fault, don't be too hard on yourself. You might even have morales due to going up and down due to individual performances. Yes, there you go, Jeff Malott, thank you. Great example for me right there. So it's the NHL and the AHL telling me a lot of morale information as the year goes on. When July 1st passes, you'll see that any player who was qualified as an RFA, remember we're talking about qualifying a player, if that player was qualified by you, so that you could sign them in July or whatever, and you never ended up doing so, the deadline to get them playing in that season is December 1st. Once December 1st has passed, you cannot sign them, no team can sign them, and they cannot play until next season. So if you qualify them, and okay, July, August didn't work out, but you sign them in September, or October, or November, then that's still fine. They can join your team and play. Qualifying a player can also be helpful to try and get their contract demand down. I didn't get into too much of that, but if you have a player who's asking for crazy money, they want 8 by 20 million, and you qualify them as an RFA, usually by time the 2nd or 3rd week of July comes around, they've come to their senses and they want a more reasonable contract. But be careful, if you hold on to an RFA past about, I forget the exact date, I think it's July 27th or July 28th, if you don't get a contract signed with an RFA before then, they will only want a 1-year contract. They'll take 1 year at whatever, 5 million, but then if you want between 2 and 8 years, then they want astronomically more. So if you want to sign a long-term contract for an RFA, make sure it gets done within the first about 2.5 weeks of July. So the season is going on, life is great. I don't say, oh, I really want to see this game against Pittsburgh, I missed it. Oh no. I can go back, and what's great now in franchise mode is I can go back to this game by backing out and going to the game logs. In fact, I can actually see any game in the NHL that has been played so far this season. So if I scroll to the league tab and go to box scores, I can go back to that certain date by scrolling through here. I can just sort by NHL, AHL, the month of the year. Is it the entire league or just a certain division? So you can narrow it down a little bit. But I really want to see what that score was against the Penguins. I forget what day it was. But there you go, Kings and Penguins. The game-winning goal, it tells me who scored it, and if I click on the game itself, it tells me the box score and the events that happened throughout the game. The goals and the penalties only, so not like things like shots and hits, but I could get goals, penalties for the events, and as well as looking at the entire stats from every player for the entirety of the game. So Kopitar took 7 shots this game. That was great. Who was the plus minus? Okay, Fiala and Kempe were both plus 2s. But Lewis, Edmondson, Fogel, Kaliev, they're all negative 2s. Blah, blah, blah. You can also see the 3 stars of the game. That's great. So these are the things you can see when you go back into the game logs. Or if you go into the game itself, any game itself, and simulate through it, quick simming we call it. So if you sim to the next game, and you quick sim, let's say, against the Blue Jackets, you'll still get that same information, but you'll get to see it happen in real time over the course of 3 periods. And you can't make changes on the fly in this quick sim, but you can enter the game. So if I go to ×8 speed, you can, in the bottom right corner, you can change the speed of the simulation, sim the whole period, sim the whole second period. Now it's 3-1. I resume the 3rd period. I want to hop in maybe with 2 minutes left. I want to go play it. I want to go watch it. That's up to you. But once the game is over, I get, once again, all those same information that I got if I went to the game logs. The events, the stats for each team, and the 3 stars in the game that was. So game logs, super, super helpful. We've been asking for it for a long time. I'm really glad that it's finally in here. It sadly does reduce the speed of simulation. Thankfully, I think it's been fixed a little bit with the most recent patch. Still not as good as it was on NHL 24 on the PlayStation 5. But that being said, the next thing that we could simulate too over the course of a season would be the trade deadline. Over the course of the season as well, you'll be offered trades that you can accept, decline, edit, or you can even decline and go edit your trade block. Stop sending the offers for fill-in-the-blank player. You can do that too. Usually the offers that you get sent are pretty ridiculous, so yeah, I can't remember the last time I accepted a trade that was sent to me. It's usually you who has to create the trade offer. You'll also get players being placed on waivers, so you can claim the player or decline the player. It's as simple as that. If you claim them, you're now responsible for their cap hit. They're now a member of your organization. You can trade them whatever you like, but if you also want to call them up and send them down again, they will have to go through waivers as well. So if you're a really good team, the waiver order works. It's worst to best. So if you're a really bad team who claims a player on waivers and then puts them back on waivers, there is a possibility that they can get claimed. But if you're the best team in the league and you get offered a player on waivers, that means you were the 32nd team to be offered that player. If you send them back through waivers again, it is very unlikely that they will be claimed. So keep that in mind. Your position in the standings will determine whether it might make sense for you to claim that player who is on waivers. So we're approaching the trade deadline now. No trades are happening in the NHL. They're offering you trades, but CPU teams are not trading amongst each other. If you have owner mode on, you can talk about the season ticket drive starting. You can set ticket prices, how much have been sold. Do you want to change ticket prices based on the upper bowl, the lower bowl, club seats, etc. Again, where does that really get you? And then you can move towards the trade deadline. This is the first day that CPU teams will finally start trading with each other. Finally, guy on waivers, Mike Riley. And at the trade deadline, you'll have the option to tell the league, what is your status? Are you a seller that you're trading your roster players and you want prospects and picks back? Conservative seller that you're, maybe in the mix? Conservative buyer that you might be trying to make the playoffs? Or definitely a buyer to say, hey, I'm willing to move out picks and prospects and I want roster pieces today. Or even keep your current trade block and nothing happens. Let's say, I don't know, I'm a conservative buyer, let's say with the Kings, and I can either enter the trade deadline minigame or just keep on simulating and let the teams make their trades. I'm not making any myself. If you enter the trade deadline minigame, you'll see players who are available, which teams have them, what's their status, what other teams are interested, what are they looking for as a return. As you can see, return first round pick, what's the contract type, how many years left on the contract, all that stuff. That's scrolling through the top 10 players available. You can look at who just is available in general, who has already been sold, who was on the market but now is off the market. Sometimes if a team makes a trade that changes their status, they don't need to be looking to sell someone. And you can look by team as well. Now, what you also want to keep in mind is that, let's say I really wanted, see, Granlund just got traded, I can't get him anymore. Let's say I really wanted Brendan Gallagher. I should check the trade blocks around the NHL the day before the trade deadline, because if that's the case, like if I really want Gallagher, I can take my time to try and build a trade. But right now, the clock is ticking. It starts at 6 a.m., it goes till 12 p.m., so you have 6 imaginary hours to make a trade happen, while you're also in competition with other teams that are trying to get trades done. So I would say if you really want a player, get it done before the trade deadline, but this adds an extra little bit of pressure. You can propose a trade from here, find a trade, you can look at stats of the league if you want to check in on something. It's nice. And then when you're good to go, you're done, you can exit the trade deadline and keep on simulating from there. And now here we are arriving at the end of the regular season. At the end of the season, if your team didn't make the playoffs, that's tough. Unfortunately, nothing to really look forward to in the playoffs. I can't show you a playoff sim. The playoff sim is exactly the same as the regular season sim. There's nothing special about it. But in the playoffs, you will see the playoff tree. So if we sim just a few more days to get the regular season over and done with, maybe the team in the AHL makes it. That's always a possibility. Keep on simulating. The season is over. All right, stop simming. If I change over, if I back out first and go look at the stats, first, the regular season stats that were. So if I go back to the main screen, press R3, and then go to the team stats, I'm able to scroll through the division, the conference, and the league rankings in both the NHL and the AHL. So who won the President's Trophy, all that stuff. Where did my team finish? The Kings were, second last. Yikes. The sim was not kind to LA. I can sort by wins, losses, overtime losses, tiebreakers, goals for, goals against, power play percentages, penalty kill percentages, last 10, home and away records, all great. And then for the player scoring, I can also sort by a lot of different metrics, such as goals, assists, plus minus, penalty minutes, shots, shot percentages, shooting percentage, I should say, power play stuff, minutes, time on ice, face-offs, hits, giveaways, fights. Now, this is an interesting one. You can sort by fights, but only per season. If I look at Trevor Moore's all-time stats, I can see all of his same stats here that we just looked at, except for the fights. Why is that so? I have no idea why. But what's also interesting is that if I go, whether it be the end of the season or in the middle of the season, new to NHL 25, I can now, if I go look at full career stats, so previously it was just preseason stats, regular season stats, and playoff stats all time for Trevor Moore. But now I can also look at game logs and split stats. So in game logs, I can see any game over the course of the entire season. I can look at sort by month. I want to see, okay, we really fell apart in that last month. What happened? I might want to say, well, Trevor Moore, he was scoreless in the last 10 games of the season. What? So looking at this log here allows me to kind of save, time, I guess, from having to go into every game and look at every game log and everything like that. I can just get a quick glance right here. Or I can even look at, instead of game logs, at split stats. What did he do in the last 10 games? What was his scoring at home, scoring away, within the division, within the conference, and then even within each month, and then even against each team. You played 4 games against the Oilers, you scored 5 points this season. Moore, you're a monster. It adds storylines, especially, let's say your round 1 matchup is against the Oilers. Oh, Trevor Moore, he played really well against them. I'm going to maybe give him an increased role. It's really fun to be able to build those storylines by now having the option to scroll through these things. Split stats, game logs, full career stats, all that is available to you at any point in the season for any player. Love it. I can also look at forwards, defense, goalies, rookie stats, rookie skaters, rookie goalies, and I can then go to also look at my conference, my division, or the entire NHL. So Nathan MacKinnon, 118 points. Like I said, medium scoring gives you these kinds of results. It's probably the most well-balanced one. But then you look at the goaltenders, and you have the best goalies in the league at all above 2.5, 2.6 goals against average, which is not really reflective of the real world. But it's franchise mode, and that's about everything that you'd want to look at when you are in the league scoring. Yeah, you got team stats, you got player stats, and then of course you also have the playoff tree now that you're in the postseason. Whether you're in it or not, you can take a look at what the matchups are and how many games in what the Canucks and the Kraken. Was it a Canucks in 6? Was it Kraken in 4? It'll tell you that, as well as bringing you all the way to the Stanley Cup final. Then you get to the awards, which we already looked at, and look at the team stats and the player stats as well for the playoffs. The Kings didn't make it, so I can't show you, but it's the exact same screens just for playoff team stats and playoff player stats. Now to look at what happens in franchise mode once your season is over, I'll throw it back to NHL 24. So now that the season is over and the Canadiens did not make the postseason, what you can do is sim to the draft, because that's it now. You'll go ahead and click on playoffs. It'll simulate all the way to the end of the postseason, and the next screen you'll see will be owner stuff and who won the Stanley Cup. And there you have it. Playoffs are complete. Edmonton won the Cup. Calder Cup goes to the Charlotte Checkers, and it'll tell you about the new information for next season's salary cap. It jumped by like $6 million, so I find that's a bit much for a one-season jump. So salary cap goes up. It'll tell you the draft lottery results as well. No changes this year, which is very rare. Usually there's at least 1 or 2 changes. So draft lottery results. Those draft lottery results, by the way, are predetermined from the beginning of the season. Not who will win, but what position will win. It is predetermined that the 4th spot will jump to number 1, for example, at the beginning of the year. So if you're trying to win the draft lottery and you keep exiting out the day before the lottery, nothing will change because it's already been predetermined for which spot will win the lottery from the start of the year. So owner goals at the end of the year, the team store needs to be a little nicer. Failed. Don't make a habit of this or there will be consequences. Okay, thank you very much. Central scouting, one last time if you want to look at the draft class. And then you'll also be able to look at retired players. Retired players over the year, any players who retired either in free agency or with your team, with other teams in the NHL, if they had NHL affiliations or not, sorting by position and by team. Then you can look at coach retirement as well as retired players who can now be hired as scouts or coaches. So we see Brian Little, Stephen Comfort, and Eric Stahl can now be hired as scouts. Very interesting. And now you can also look at draft interviews. This can be very valuable. No matter what draft strategy you use for scouting, it's very valuable to use interviews. For example, these top guys, we know nothing about them. I find that so crazy on auto scouting that we know nothing about these guys. I can conduct interviews with up to 3 players. In those interviews, in terms of important information, I can essentially figure out what the player's strengths and weaknesses are, what his player type is, and how far away he is from making the NHL. So if I say interview player, It's such a long song and dance for nothing. Personality doesn't mean much. Even with morale turned on, I'd rather know more about the player's potential when it comes to the draft. I don't want to draft a good personality guy who has AHL potential. So if I ask this player about his skills, Cole Yzerman, of course, we know this is going to be a highly touted prospect. So if I say, what are your strengths? He'll tell me. If I say, what are your weaknesses? He'll tell me. And then the last thing that I want to look at is what is either your player type or your NHL ETA. I actually say that playstyle and NHL ETA is more important than strengths and weaknesses. So I say do those two first and then do strengths or weaknesses depending on which one you care about more. So here I can click on playstyle or readiness. Let's go ahead and click on playstyle just for fun, and he'll tell me, let's say looks like he's a sniper. My shot is my best asset. So thank you. I have up to 3 questions with up to 3 players. I know Cole Yzerman, because he's the first overall pick, is likely NHL ready, so I don't need to use a question on that. I found out that he's a sniper, and I found out that he has shooting and defense as his strength and weakness respectively. So Yzerman, now I see his player type. If I go into his scouting report, I can see, very good. Even though I don't know much about his attributes or his potential or whatever else, I see A+ shooting. Even though it's only 2 bars scouted, you see the little binocular left next to the word that says shooting. 4 bars means fully scouted. 3 bars means a pretty good idea. 2 bars means so-so, and 1 bar means pretty much a guess. So A+ shooting with 2 bars is okay, but for a first overall guy, I know that it's very likely to be more accurate. So it's good to know, at least I know that. So what I'm trying to say is interviews are good for players that you know nothing about, that your scouts didn't cover maybe, or maybe if you did scout that player, there's just one last thing you want to know about. Like this guy, if I say Berkeley Catton, 3 bars out of 4, two-way forward, I might go to the interview just to really make sure he's a two-way forward, because it could be possible he's actually something else. So aside from that, I scroll and I see a lot of players are not scouted very well by the auto scouting. That's why I do my own scouting, but I could do up to 2 more interviews. Pro scout calls, blah, blah, blah. And now here we are at the draft. As I said earlier, something that you want to do at the end of the season is go to your progress reports to see what kind of development your players had over the season. So if I sort by attributes modified, I'll see Cole Caulfield. I'll see lots of natural growth. That's exactly what I want to see. Very good. And if I look in the system, I see, Machar, he was like a 67, I think. That was a 76. Florian Jackey's up to a 64, 23 modifiers there. There's the progress reports. I see a big difference. It's good to keep track of who's going where. It helps me to have a better idea of who I'm going after in free agency and whatnot. Now I can go into the draft itself. I won't spend too much time here, but at the draft, you can make trades. You can trade for players just as normal trades, or you can look at players who have expiring contracts. That's always a good little plus, a nice little trick. So keep that in mind when you're at the draft. If you're not trading, you can go ahead and sim to your pick. You can sim 1 pick at a time, or you can go ahead and sim to your pick, the entire draft, or just 1 round at a time. Sim to pick number 13. As you can see, a lot of players with Fog of War on and all that, you can't see their overalls or their potentials. When it's your pick, you can take a 5-minute timeout if you're not sure what you're doing, or you can go ahead and make your pick. Of course, it would be according to who has the highest potential, who is your scout recommending. You could look who is the closest to making the NHL, because if a player is NHL ready, according to their NHL ETA, like let's say the difference between these 2 players, Maxime Massé, it says he's 3 years away. That means his overall is somewhere in the 60 overall range. If they are NHL ready, that means they're likely about 77 overall or higher. Usually that range is about 77 to 84 overall if they're NHL ready. If it says 1 year away, they're somewhere in the 70s, 2 or 3 years away in the 60s, 4 or 5 years away, usually in the 50s or high 40s for the overall. But if you don't know anything, you gotta take a guess. So if I take Joe McGinley's son, welcome to Montreal, buddy, he's still unknown. I need to scout my own player before I can know more about him. Just a bunch of question marks everywhere. But he is drafted, he is in my system, bada bing, bada boom. So at any time, I can look at the message center, the draft board, draft summary, blah, 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 or just say, sim to my next pick now. As the draft is going on, I can look at who I'm targeting. Okay, I'm at 62, but the next guy I want is at 85. So I'll trade down from 62 to 80 and then gain an extra pick there. So it's all about how you want to strategize. And that's about it for the draft. So when I'm all done, I've said I've made all my picks. I can go to sim options and just say sim entire draft. That'll take me all the way to the end. I'll get a quick little recap on who I drafted. There are all the players I drafted. I can go by teams. I can go by round. It's very nice to be able to get a little recap if I want to go back and see guys who I wanted, where did they go. So just keep note of that possibility as well. And once the draft is over, you can then simulate one more day. As you can see on the calendar here, I'm 1 day after the draft and 1 day before the re-sign phase. So I need to advance one more day. Now I'll have scouts who are expiring, so I can go to the assigned scouts screen and re-sign those scouts by pressing X, you see in the bottom left corner, re-sign scout, which is very easy if owner mode is turned off, because another big thing about owner mode being turned off is that the budget does not really come into play. Even though the budget will be there, I can go over it and it doesn't matter. So it's essentially like there's no budget with the owner mode being turned off. So I can offer him whatever, 8 years at a max money if I want, but I don't need to. If the scout's already on my team, usually he'll re-sign for whatever I'm offering. And now if I jump back to NHL 25 to wrap it up, sorry with how things have been all over the place. It's the first year that the guide is so difficult in this way because negotiations aren't just at one time of the year. My guides previously has been always like, okay, this is the start of the year, this happens. In the middle of the year, this happens. At the end of the year, this happens. But conversations are throughout. Coaching stuff is throughout. The new clauses are for trades and for negotiations. So it was really like a ping pong type of guide where I was all over the place a bit. That's where the timestamps come in to help. I promise in NHL 26, barring a disaster where the game is broken for the first 2 months like NHL 25, the guide will come out sooner and be more clear. So I'm sorry about having to intersperse some NHL 24 footage and stuff like that. For the times that I did, it was always stuff that was still applicable to NHL 25, but I digress. I hope that you can forgive me for that. It's only been like 15 hours of work, so no biggie. Just, hey, leave that like if you don't mind. Now, if we go to wrap up the season, we already looked at the re-sign phase, we looked at free agency and all that. I just wanted to remind you, I didn't actually show it on screen. Something in the back of my head is just telling me I have to do this, so let me just go ahead and show you. I've been saying qualifier RFAs a lot. What does that mean to qualify? You gotta click on the player, click qualify, and they will be qualified at what they were paid in their last contract. So if no contract gets worked out between our two sides, Laferriere, for example, could choose to accept the qualifying offer of $960K. Let's say he was an 88 overall who really knows that he deserves whatever, 8 million plus. He won't accept that qualifying offer. But if he's a low enough overall, once his demand gets low enough that it's close to what you offered in the qualifying offer, they will accept that qualifying offer without you even having to go back and send another offer to him. But if the qualifying offer was $950K, now they want 8 million, there will never be an acceptance of that qualifying offer. You need to go back on July 1st and get that signing done, or anywhere after July 1st. We keep on simming to next season. Season ticket drive is ended. Okay, great. And then finally, it will tell me, okay, owner goes evaluated. I'm failed. I hate you. Available funds bonus. Okay, thanks for the bonus money, even though I failed all your things. And finally, once the season gets started, you'll be shown this message to edit your lines, set your captains, or get the year started. When you press done, that is when everything crosses over. It's September 13th, top left corner, now 2025-26 season, and everything starts over once again. So I think that covers about everything. This was the most painful experience I've ever had making a guide video. Like I said, I promise NHL 26 is going to be better. Feeling the crunch of Christmas Eve tomorrow and having patches of patches for the last 2 months was really not helpful. So apologies if it was a bit all over the place. Maybe I'm being hard on myself. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the guide. And again, NHL 26 is going to be better. Thanks so much for watching. I hope I answered any of your questions that you had. If I didn't, please leave a comment here on YouTube or over on our Discord server, linked in the description to get the answer. I'll reply to you as soon as possible. Leave a like if you enjoyed, or just for my sanity, please. And of course, subscribe if you haven't already for all of our viewer-led franchise mode series, our player career simulation, NHL 25 patch and roster update videos to always keep you up to date on what's going on within the game. And I'll leave you off there. Thank you everyone so very much for watching. I'm looking forward to reading all of your thoughts, all of your questions, and seeing you once again in the next one.